The gate was locked. Clara Whitmore stood there with her hands on the rough wood, staring at the chain wrapped twice around the post like someone meant business. Behind her, the wagon that had carried her the last 40 miles was already gone. Just dust now, disappearing into the afternoon haze. The driver had dumped her luggage in the dirt, taken his money, and left without a word. Probably figured she wasn't his problem anymore. She was nobody's problem. That was the whole point. The ranch stretched out beyond the gate, all brown grass and distant mountains under a sky too big to make sense of. No house in sight, no smoke from a chimney, nothing that suggested people or warmth or the future she'd been promised in those letters. Just land. Empty, indifferent land. Clara pulled her coat tighter. November wind had teeth out here. "Thomas?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. She tried again, louder. "Thomas Wardell?" Nothing. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals she couldn't see. She watched it for a moment, envying the perspective. From up there, she'd be just a dark spot next to a gate, barely worth noticing. 3 months ago, Thomas Wardell's letters had arrived at her boarding house in Philadelphia like answers to prayers she hadn't known she was praying. Neat handwriting, careful words. A man who owned land, who worked hard, who wanted a wife to build something with. She'd written back. He'd sent money for the train. She'd packed everything she owned into 2 cases and a trunk, said goodbye to exactly nobody who mattered, and headed west with her stomach full of hope and her head full of pictures that turned out to be lies. The first lie, Thomas Wardell was a good man. The second lie, he'd actually wanted her. She'd figured out the truth about an hour ago, when he'd met her at the station in Collier Creek with a face like week-old bread and eyes that wouldn't meet hers. He was younger in person than she'd imagined, maybe 30, though he carried himself like someone older, beaten down by something. Not ugly, but not the square-jawed rancher from her imagination either. Just ordinary, tired. And the way he looked at her when she stepped off that train, like she was a bill come due that he couldn't pay, that should have told her everything. But she'd smiled anyway, extended her hand, said something bright and stupid about the journey. He'd shaken her hand like it was a dead fish. The ride out had been worse, long silences broken only by the wagon wheels and his occasional direction to the driver. She'd tried conversation, asked about the ranch, about the town, about his life out here. Got nothing but grunts and half-sentences. Finally, she'd just sat there, watching Montana roll past and feeling her hope curdle into something harder. When they'd reached this gate, his gate supposedly, he'd finally spoken more than 3 words together. "This was a mistake," he'd said. Still wouldn't look at her. "I can't. I thought I could, but I can't." "Can't what?" "This, you, any of it." He'd gestured vaguely at her, at the luggage, at the whole situation. "I'll pay the driver to take you back to town. There's a boarding house. You can stay there until you figure out whatever you need to figure out." The numbness had started then, that cold, spreading feeling like she was watching this happen to someone else. "You invited me here," she'd said. Her voice had sounded strange, distant. "You sent money. You wrote letters for 3 months. "I know what I did." "So what changed?" Finally, he'd looked at her, really looked. And what she saw in his face wasn't cruelty exactly. Cruelty would have been easier to hate. It was just nothing. Emptiness. Like he'd already decided she didn't matter and was just waiting for her to accept it. "Nothing changed," he'd said. "That's the problem. Go back to town, Miss Whitmore. This isn't going to work." Then he'd climbed on a horse that had been tied to the wagon, she hadn't even noticed it before, and ridden through the gate without unlocking it for her. Just left. The driver had muttered something about not getting involved in domestic affairs, taken the extra money Thomas had shoved at him, and dumped her here. And now she was looking at a locked gate with everything she owned scattered in the dirt and maybe $4 in her purse. Clara closed her eyes, breathed, opened them again. The gate was still locked. The land was still empty. The sun was still heading toward the horizon like it had somewhere better to be. She could cry. She wanted to cry. But crying wouldn't unlock the gate or bring back the wagon or change the fact that she'd burned every bridge in Philadelphia to come here, and there was nothing back there worth returning to anyway. Her mother was dead. Her father had made it clear years ago that daughters were expensive disappointments, The boarding house she'd left wouldn't take her back without money she didn't have. She had no friends, no family, no prospects. Thomas Wardle had been her last idea, and he'd just ridden away without looking back. So, no crying. Not yet. She turned around slowly, taking inventory. 2 suitcases, one with clothes, one with books, and the few personal items she'd thought worth keeping. A trunk with linens, a winter coat, her mother's china wrapped in newspaper. All of it sitting in Montana dirt like trash someone had dumped. The road was empty in both directions. Town was 40 miles back the way she'd come. The ranch, Thomas's ranch, was somewhere past this gate, but she had no idea how far. And even if she could get over the fence, even if she could find the house, he'd made himself pretty clear about her welcome there. Clara sat down on her trunk. Her legs just gave up. She sat and stared at nothing and tried to think. $4? Maybe enough for a week at that boarding house Thomas had mentioned, if the rates were reasonable. Which left her exactly where she'd been in Philadelphia. Broke, alone, running out of time. Except in Philadelphia, at least she'd known the streets. Out here she knew nothing, no one. The wind picked up. She could smell weather in it, something cold and damp coming from the mountains. Storm, maybe. She should move, find shelter, figure something out before dark. She didn't move. Somewhere behind her, a horse blew air through its nostrils, that particular sound horses make when they're not quite bothered but close to it. Claire's head snapped up. She turned. A man sat on a dark bay gelding about 20 feet away, so still she hadn't heard him approach. He was older than Thomas, 40 maybe, with a face that looked like it had been carved with rough tools and left unfinished. Weathered, hard. A scar ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline, pale against sun-dark skin. His clothes were work-worn, practical. Everything about him said he belonged out here in a way she never would. They looked at each other for a long moment. His eyes were an unusual color, light brown, almost amber in the angled sunlight. Not warm, exactly, but not cold either. Just measuring. "You're on Wardell's land, Suspam," he said finally. His voice matched the rest of him, rough, quiet, like he didn't use it much. "I know." "He know you're here?" Clara laughed. It came out bitter, sharp. "He's the one who left me here." The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in those amber eyes. Understanding, maybe, or just recognition of a familiar type of trouble. "You the bride from Philadelphia?" "I was supposed to be." "He changed his mind?" "Apparently." The man was quiet for another moment, then swung down from his horse with the easy grace of someone who'd been riding since before he could walk. He was tall, taller than she'd thought, and when he walked toward her, she had a sudden animal urge to step back. She didn't, mostly because her legs still felt unreliable. He stopped a few feet away, looking at her luggage scattered in the dirt, then at the locked gate, then at her. "How much money you got?" The question was so direct it caught her off guard. "I don't see how that's your—" "How much?" She swallowed. $4, maybe a little more. Won't get you far." "I'm aware of that, thank you." He studied her face like he was reading something written there. Whatever he saw seemed to settle some question he'd been asking himself. "I've got a ranch about 3 miles north," he said. "Need someone who can cook, clean, handle basic accounts. Works hard, pays fair, room and board included." He paused. "You interested?" Clara stared at him. "You don't know anything about me. Know you got no money, and winter's coming. Know Wardell's a coward who doesn't deserve what he's got. Know you're either desperate enough to work or proud enough to die out here, and I don't have time to watch someone freeze to death." He tilted his head slightly. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Clean?" "Obviously." "Do math?" "Better than most men I've met." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face, gone so fast she wasn't sure she'd seen it. "Then you're hired. Name's Ethan Hale. Get your things." He turned and started gathering her luggage before she could respond. Just picked up the trunk like it weighed nothing and carried it to his horse. The gelding stood patient while he started strapping things down. Clara found her voice. "Wait." He didn't stop working. "For what?" I don't... This is... You struggled to find words that made sense. You're offering me work? Just like that? Just like that. Why? Now he did stop, turned to look at her straight on. You want to sit here and wait for Wardell to change his mind? Want to walk 40 miles back to town with no money and nowhere to go? Want to spend the winter in a boarding house hoping someone else takes pity on you? He gestured at the luggage. Or you want work that's honest, pay that's fair, and a roof that doesn't leak? Your choice. Put like that, it wasn't much of a choice at all. Clara stood up, her legs held. She walked over to where he was working and picked up one of her suitcases. What kind of ranch? Cattle. Some horses. He secured the last strap and moved to his horse's head, checking the bit. Small operation, just me and a hand named Sam who comes 3 days a week. House needs work. Books are a mess. Cooking's been whatever I could throw together. He glanced at her. Fair warning, it's not easy. Land's hard, weather's harder. Town folks have opinions about everything. You'll hear talk. What kind of talk? The kind people make when they don't have enough real problems. He swung up into the saddle, then extended a hand down to her. You'll ride behind me. It's 3 miles, but the road's rough. She looked at his hand, looked at the locked gate, looked at the empty road behind her. Then she took his hand. His grip was solid, calloused. He pulled her up behind the saddle like she weighed nothing, and she had to grab his coat to keep from sliding off. The horse shifted under the extra weight, but didn't protest. Hold on, Ethan said, and kicked the gelding into a walk. They left her old life in the dust by a locked gate, and Clara didn't look back. The ride took closer to 40 minutes than the half-hour Clara had expected, mostly because Ethan took his time, letting the horse pick its way across rough ground that didn't look like it had ever seen a proper road. The land rolled and dipped, covered in that same brown grass that seemed to go on forever. Mountains rose in the distance, purple-gray against the darkening sky. Beautiful, in a harsh kind of way. Unforgiving. Clara's hands were numb by the time she saw the buildings. Not from cold, though the wind was picking up, but from gripping Ethan's coat so hard her fingers had locked. She forced them to relax as they approached. The ranch wasn't much to look at. A main house, small and weathered, with a porch that sagged on one side. A barn that had seen better decades. A few outbuildings that might have been storage or equipment sheds. Everything looked functional but worn, like someone had been holding things together with spit and stubbornness. Ethan rode straight to the house and dismounted, then reached up to help her down. Her legs were stiff from the ride, and she stumbled getting off. He caught her elbow, steadied her, let go as soon as she had her balance. House is through there, he said, nodding at the door. I'll get your things. Go on in. She hesitated. Should I? Doors unlocked. Make yourself at home. He was already unstrapping her trunk. Clara climbed the porch steps. They creaked under her weight and pushed open the door. The inside matched the outside. One main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space all together. A hallway leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything clean enough but bare. Practical. No decorations, no pictures on the walls, no curtains on the windows. Like someone lived here but didn't really want to. She walked to the kitchen area. The stove was old but well maintained. Shelves held basic supplies: flour, salt, coffee, not much else. A table with 2 chairs sat under the window. One of the chairs had a leg that didn't quite match the others, like it had been replaced after breaking. The door opened behind her. Ethan came in carrying her trunk, set it down by the wall without comment, went back out, came back with the suitcases, set those down too. Your room's the second door on the left, he said. Bed's made. Wash basin and pitcher are on the dresser. Outhouse is 30 feet behind the house. You'll see it. He paused by the stove. You hungry? Clara realized she was. She'd eaten breakfast in Collier Creek before Thomas had picked her up, and that felt like a lifetime ago. Yes. There's bread in the box, butter in the cold cellar, doors outside, around the corner, some dried meat in the cupboard. He moved toward the hallway. I've got work to finish in the barn. Get settled. We'll talk about the job over dinner. He was gone before she could respond. Clara stood in the empty kitchen and tried to process what had just happened. An hour ago, she'd been abandoned at a locked gate with no future and $4. Now she was in a stranger's house, hired for a job she hadn't interviewed for, and he'd just left her alone with all his things. Either Ethan Hale was incredibly trusting or incredibly foolish, or maybe he just didn't care. Maybe he had nothing worth stealing. She shook off the thought and went to explore her room. It was small. A bed, a dresser, a trunk at the foot of the bed, a window that looked out over empty land. The bed had a quilt on it, well-made, old, the colors faded from washing. The kind of thing someone's grandmother had stitched together decades ago. It was the only thing in the room that felt like it had a history. Clara sat on the bed. The mattress was firm, the quilt soft. She could hear wind outside, and somewhere farther away cattle lowing. Otherwise, silence. The kind of deep quiet she'd never experienced in Philadelphia, where there was always noise, horses, voices, machinery, life. Out here, there was just this. She should unpack, should go find that butter and make something to eat, should figure out what the hell she was doing in a strange man's house in the middle of Montana with winter coming and no plan beyond work that's honest, pay that's fair. Instead, she lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling until the light started to fail. Someone was knocking on her door. Not hard, but persistent. Clara jerked awake, disoriented. Dark. When had it gotten dark? She sat up, her neck stiff from the angle she'd been sleeping at. "Miss Whitmore?" Ethan's voice muffled through the door. "You alive in there?" "Yes. Sorry. I must have fallen asleep." She stood, trying to smooth her dress, which was hopelessly wrinkled. "I'm sorry." "Nothing to apologize for. Long day." A pause. "You still planning to eat?" "Yes, I'll be right out." She heard his footsteps retreat. Clara found the wash basin. There was water in the pitcher, cold but clean, and splashed her face, trying to wake up properly. Her reflection in the small mirror over the dresser looked haggard. Hair coming loose from its pins, circles under her eyes, expression halfway between lost and stubborn. She fixed what she could and went to find dinner. Ethan was at the stove, and the smell hit her before she saw what he was cooking, something with onions and meat. He glanced over when she came in. "Found the butter?" "No, I fell asleep before I could—" "Forget it." Made stew instead. He ladled something into 2 bowls. "Not fancy, but it's hot." They sat at the table, and Clara tried not to wolf down the food like someone who'd skipped a meal and then some. It was good, simple, but well seasoned, the meat tender. Better than anything she'd managed to cook in her boarding house. "This is very good," she said. "Basic cowboy food, nothing special." He ate methodically, not rushed, but efficient. "You cooked much before?" "Yes. At the boarding house where I lived, I helped in the kitchen sometimes. Before that, at home." She paused. "My mother taught me before she died." He nodded, but didn't pry. "Good. Kitchen's yours starting tomorrow. Breakfast at 5, dinner at 7. I'm out most of the day, so lunch is whenever. Just leave something I can eat cold if I don't make it back." He gestured with his spoon. "Sam will be here Tuesday and Thursday. He eats like a horse, so plan for that." "What about payment?" $15 a month plus room and board. That's fair for the area." He looked at her directly. "If you need an advance to buy anything personal, say so now. I'll take it out of your first month." $15. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had this morning. "No advance, thank you." "All right." He finished his stew and stood, taking his bowl to the basin. "I'll show you where everything is tomorrow. For tonight, just settle in. If you need anything, I'm the first door on the right." He started toward the hallway, then paused, turned back. "One more thing. Town's Collier Creek. You saw it on the way in, about 12 miles south. I go in for supplies every 2 weeks, usually Saturday. You're welcome to come along if you want, but—" He trailed off. "But what?" "People talk. You being here, working for me. They'll have opinions." "What kind of opinions?" Ethan shrugged. "The predictable kind. Single woman, single man, same house. Math's not complicated." Heat crept up Clara's neck. "I see. Just warning you. Town's small. Everyone knows everyone's business, or thinks they do." He met her eyes. If it bothers you, you don't have to come. I can get whatever you need. And if I do come? To town? Then you hold your head up and don't give them the satisfaction. Something hard edged into his voice. They're going to talk regardless. Might as well give them something real to gossip about instead of letting them invent it. Clara thought about locked gates and men who rode away, and the fact that she'd already been judged and found wanting today by someone who'd promised her better. I'm not afraid of gossip. Good. He turned back toward the hallway. Get some rest, Miss Whitmore. Clara. You can call me Clara. He paused again. Didn't turn around. Good night, Clara. Good night, Mr. Hale. Ethan. Then he was gone, and she was alone in the kitchen with dirty dishes and a future that had shifted so completely in one afternoon that she couldn't quite get her balance. She washed the dishes, put them away, found the bread he'd mentioned and the dried meat, and made mental notes about what she'd need for proper meals. Explored the cupboards and the cold cellar, which was better stocked than she'd expected, and started making lists in her head. By the time she went back to her room, it was full dark outside, the kind of dark she'd never seen in the city, where street lamps kept the night at bay. Out here, when the sun went down, it was just gone. She could see stars through her window, though, more stars than she'd known existed, scattered across the sky like someone had spilled salt. Clara unpacked slowly, hung her dresses in the small closet, put her books on the dresser, unwrapped her mother's china and arranged it carefully in the trunk, where it would be safe. Each item a piece of the life she'd left behind, the person she'd been. When everything was put away, she changed into her nightgown and crawled under the quilt. The bed was comfortable. The room was quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling something loose on the porch. She should feel grateful. She had shelter, food, work. More than she'd had 6 hours ago. More than she'd had any right to expect. But lying there in the dark, listening to a stranger's house settle around her, all she felt was lost. Clara closed her eyes and made herself count stars in her memory until sleep came and took her under. The first week was harder than she'd expected, not the work itself. Clara had worked hard before, and cooking and cleaning for 2 people was manageable. But the isolation pressed on her like a physical weight. Days would pass where the only person she'd see was Ethan, and he wasn't what anyone would call chatty. He'd leave before dawn, come back at dusk, eat whatever she'd made without much comment beyond good or fine, and then disappear into his room or out to the barn for evening work. Sam, the ranch hand, was friendly enough when he showed up, but he was older and mostly deaf in one ear from a horse kick years back. So conversation involved a lot of shouting. Clara started talking to herself just to hear human speech. She learned the rhythm of the ranch. Breakfast at 5, usually eggs if the chickens were laying, bread if she'd baked, coffee always. Ethan would tell her if he'd be back for lunch. If not, she'd leave cold meat and bread wrapped in cloth on the table. Dinner at 7, unless weather or work kept him later. After dinner, dishes, then time alone before bed. She learned other things too. That Ethan took his coffee black, hot enough to burn. That he hated waste. If she scraped leftovers into the scrap bucket, he'd notice and make a comment about using it for stew the next day. That he had a bad shoulder, the left one, that bothered him when storms were coming. He'd roll it unconsciously, grimacing when he thought she wasn't looking. She learned that he'd lived here alone for at least 5 years. And before that? Well, he didn't talk about before that. On her 6th day, she found the photograph. She'd been cleaning, really cleaning, not just the surface work the place had been getting. She'd moved furniture, swept corners, wiped down shelves. In the main room, there was a trunk pushed against the wall, covered with a blanket and clearly not meant to be noticed. Clara had worked around it for days, but dust was accumulating on the blanket, and her sense of thoroughness finally won over her sense of boundaries. She moved the blanket. The trunk wasn't locked. And sitting on top, in a simple wooden frame, was a photograph. A woman, young, maybe 25. Pretty in a delicate way, with dark hair and a shy smile. She stood in front of this very house, back when it looked newer, better maintained. Her hand rested on the porch railing. She looked happy. Clara picked up the frame without thinking, studying the woman's face. There was something fragile about her, something that made Clara think of flowers that bloomed early and couldn't survive the first frost. "You need something from that trunk?" She nearly dropped the frame. Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry. I was cleaning, and I shouldn't have. Clara set the frame back carefully. It's fine. He crossed the room and picked up the photograph himself, looking at it for a long moment. My wife, Sarah. The way he said it, past tense, flat, told Clara everything she needed to know. I'm very sorry. 7 years ago this spring. He set the frame back down. Fever. Took her in 3 days. He covered it with the blanket again, precisely like he'd done it many times before. I keep meaning to put this stuff away proper, just never get around to it. I understand. Do you? It wasn't cruel the way he said it, just curious. My mother died when I was 17. I kept her hairbrush in my room for 4 years before I could finally pack it away. Clara paused. Some things we're not ready to let go of, even when we know we should. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, the way he had that first day by the gate, like he was reassessing something. She was a good woman, he said finally, gentle, kind, too kind for out here probably. She tried. His jaw worked. But this land, it takes what it wants. You blame Montana? I blame myself for bringing her here. He picked up the blanket, then set it down again without covering the trunk. She wanted to go back east, to her family. I said we couldn't afford it, said next year, said a lot of things I thought were good reasons. He shook his head. Then it was too late for next year. The silence stretched between them. The trunk can stay there, Clara said quietly. I'll clean around it. No. Ethan picked up the frame, looked at it one more time, then handed it to Clara. Put it on the shelf over the stove. She liked cooking. She'd want to be where the life is. He grabbed the trunk's handle. I'll move this to my room. He carried it down the hallway, and Clara stood holding the photograph of a woman she'd never meet, feeling like she'd just witnessed something private and important. When Ethan came back, he paused in the doorway. Thank you. For what? Not pretending you understand when you don't. Not offering comfort that doesn't help. He glanced at the photograph in her hands. People mean well, but sometimes that's worse than meaning nothing. Clara placed Sarah's picture on the shelf, angling it slightly so the woman in the frame could watch over the kitchen. I think she'd be glad you're not alone anymore, even if it's just someone to cook your meals. Maybe. Ethan pulled on his coat. Storm's coming tonight, big one, from the looks. Make sure all the shutters are latched. I'll bring in extra wood for the stove. He left, and Clara finished her cleaning with Sarah's shy smile watching from the shelf. The storm hit just after midnight. Clara woke to wind that sounded like it was trying to tear the house apart. Rain hammered the roof. Somewhere outside, something metal was banging, a shutter or a gate, broken loose and flying. She lay in bed, listening to the house groan and creak. The quilt wasn't quite warm enough. She thought about getting up to check if water was coming in anywhere, but the darkness beyond her window was absolute, and the idea of stumbling around in it kept her where she was. A knock on her door. Clara? Ethan's voice raised over the storm. You awake? Yes. Kitchen window's cracked. I need to board it before the rain gets worse. Just warning you, I'll be making noise. Do you need help? A pause. You know how to hold a board steady? I can learn. She heard him move away from the door. Clara got up, threw a shawl over her nightgown, and went to find him. The kitchen window had a split running diagonally across it, and rain was already seeping through, pooling on the sill. Ethan had boards and nails laid out on the table. Hold this, he said, positioning a board over the window. Clara pressed her hands against it, and he drove nails with quick, efficient strikes. The wind howled, rain lashed the walls. Her hands ached from holding steady, but she didn't let go until the last nail was in. Good, Ethan said. He moved to wipe up the water on the sill, and Clara grabbed a cloth to help. They worked in silence for a few minutes, soaking up water, checking the other windows. The storm raged outside. Inside, with the window boarded and the stove's residual heat still lingering, it felt almost cozy. This happen a lot? Clara asked. Storms like this? Often enough. Ethan tested the board to make sure it was secure. Winter's harder. Snow can pile up to the windows. You get used to it. I'm not sure I will. He glanced at her. You afraid? Of the storm? No. She wrung out the cloth into the bucket. Of being stuck here when it gets bad. Of not knowing what to do if something goes really wrong. You'll learn. Everyone does if they stay long enough. He paused. You thinking about leaving? I don't have anywhere else to go. That's not the same as wanting to stay. Clara met his eyes. No, it's not. Fair enough. He picked up the bucket of water and headed for the door. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a mess to clean up. But he stopped before going outside, one hand on the door frame. For what it's worth, you're doing good here. Better than I expected. You had low expectations? I had realistic ones. Most people don't make it a week. He pushed the door open. Wind howled in. You're tougher than you look. Then he was gone, swallowed by the storm, and Clara was standing in the kitchen wondering if that was a compliment or just an observation. She went back to bed and lay awake listening to the wind until dawn started to gray the edges of her window. On her 10th day at the ranch, Ethan asked if she wanted to go into Collier Creek. Need to get supplies, he said over breakfast. Figured you might want to come. See the town, get a feel for where things are, maybe pick up anything you've been needing. Clara thought about it. She'd been managing with what was available at the ranch, but there were things she'd like. A decent cookbook, thread to mend her dresses, paper to write letters to no one in particular, and more than that, she wanted to see other people, hear voices that weren't her own. Yes, she said. I'd like that. All right, we'll leave in an hour. The ride into town took most of the morning. They went in the wagon this time, Ethan driving, Clara beside him on the bench seat. The road was rutted from the storm, and twice they had to stop to move fallen branches. The land around them was still brown and endless, but Clara was starting to notice differences. Where the grass grew thicker, where rocky outcrops broke through, where the ground dipped into dry creek beds that would run fast when spring melt came. She was learning to read this place, slowly, like a language she didn't quite speak yet. Collier Creek appeared as a dark line against the horizon, then gradually resolved into buildings as they got closer. It was smaller than she'd expected. One main street, maybe 20 structures total, ranging from the relatively solid-looking hotel and general store to ramshackle buildings that looked like a strong wind might take them down. People moved along the boardwalks. Horses stood tied to rails. It was civilization, such as it was. Ethan pulled the wagon up in front of the general store and set the brake. I'll be about an hour. You need anything specific? I'll browse. Maybe find some thread. Suits me. He climbed down and came around to help her. His hands on her waist, lifting her down, were brief and impersonal. Then he was grabbing supply lists and heading inside. Clara followed at a slower pace, taking in the town. People noticed her. She could feel their eyes, their assessment. A woman in a blue dress stopped mid-conversation to stare. Two men outside the saloon watched her with open curiosity. By the time she reached the store's entrance, she felt like she'd been cataloged and filed under some heading she'd rather not know about. The store was dim after the bright day outside, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw Ethan already at the counter talking to a thin man with spectacles and suspicious eyes. The shopkeeper. Just saying, Hale, people are talking. People always talk. Ethan's voice was flat. Got my list? Sure. The shopkeeper took the paper. But you got to understand how it looks. Strange woman shows up, moves into your place. She's my housekeeper. Nothing strange about needing help. Housekeeper. The man drew the word out. That what we're calling it? Ethan leaned forward slightly. Not threatening exactly, but the temperature in the store dropped about 10 degrees. You going to fill my order or keep speculating about my private business? The shopkeeper backed up half a step. No offense meant. None taken. But Ethan's jaw was tight. I'll be back in an hour. He brushed past Clara on his way out, not looking at her, and she realized he'd heard her come in, had known she was standing there for that entire exchange. The shopkeeper noticed her now, his expression shifting from defensive to calculatingly polite. Help you, ma'am? I need thread. black and white, if you have it. Back corner, left side. He gestured vaguely, already turning back to Ethan's list. Clara found the thread and took her time selecting it, then browsed the shelves looking for anything else that might be useful. A cookbook caught her eye, Basic Recipes for the Western Home. She flipped through it. The recipes were simple, practical, perfect. She brought her selections to the counter. The shopkeeper tallied them up. "That'll be 30 cents. Clara counted out the coins, part of her first week's pay that Ethan had given her yesterday, and tried not to think about how quickly it was disappearing. "You're the girl from Philadelphia," the shopkeeper said. Not a question. "The one Wardell brought out." "Yes. Heard that didn't work out." "You heard correctly. And now you're working for Hale." He said it like he was confirming something. "How's that going?" Clara picked up her purchases. "It's going fine. Thank you." "Just surprised is all. Hale's not the friendliest sort, keeps to himself. After what happened with his wife." He trailed off meaningfully. "I'm his housekeeper, not his wife." Clara kept her voice level. "Good day." She walked out before he could say anything else. The street was busier now. A group of women stood outside the dressmaker's shop, and their conversation stopped dead when Clara emerged. She felt their stares like a physical weight. One of them, older, with iron gray hair and a mouth like a steel trap, stepped forward. "You're the Whitmore girl." "I am. I'm Mrs. Patterson, president of the Collier Creek Ladies Society." She looked Clara up and down. "We heard about your situation with Thomas Wardell. Did you?" Clara didn't make it a question. Terrible thing, leaving a girl stranded like that. Mrs. Patterson's tone suggested she thought it was terrible in a satisfying, gossipy way rather than a sympathetic one. "Of course, see, what else can you expect from that family? They've always been, well, never mind. She paused. "We also heard you've taken employment with Ethan Hale." "I have." The women behind Mrs. Patterson exchanged glances. Clara could practically hear them thinking. "Well," Mrs. Patterson said eventually, "I suppose a girl has to do what she must, though I'd be careful if I were you. Living arrangements that are unconventional tend to attract talk, so I've noticed. I'm just saying, for your own good, that appearances matter, particularly for a young woman in your position." Mrs. Patterson's smile was sharp. "Alone, without family, without prospects, people will make judgments." Something hot and angry uncurled in Clara's chest. "People are welcome to their judgments. I'm welcome to ignore them." "Well," Mrs. Patterson drew herself up, "I suppose that's your prerogative, but don't say I didn't warn you when doors start closing." "What doors?" Clara heard herself ask. "The ones that were already closed? The ones that never opened in the first place?" She felt the anger sharpening her words, pushing them out. "I was left at a locked gate with $4 and no options. Mr. Hale offered me work when no one else did. If that offends your sensibilities, I truly don't care." The other women looked scandalized. Mrs. Patterson's face went red. "Young lady, excuse me." Clara stepped around her. "I have shopping to do." She walked away feeling their stares burning into her back, her hand shaking slightly around her packages. Part of her was horrified at what she'd just said. The other part, the part that had been building since Thomas Wardell rode away without looking back, felt grimly satisfied. Let them talk. She found Ethan at the feed store, loading bags into the wagon. He glanced at her packages. "Find what you needed?" "Yes." "Good." He hefted another bag. "Give me 10 minutes and we can head back." Clara helped him load the rest of the supplies, and they were pulling out of town when she saw Mrs. Patterson still standing on the boardwalk, watching them leave with pursed lips and calculating eyes. "Made friends with the Ladies' Society, did you?" Ethan asked. There might have been amusement in his voice, hard to tell. "Mrs. Patterson had opinions about my living arrangements." "She usually does, about everything." He guided the wagon around a rut. "What'd you tell her?" "That I didn't care about her opinions." Now he definitely smiled. Just a slight curve of his mouth, but it was there. Bet she loved that. She did not. Good. He clicked his tongue at the horses. Patterson's the type who thinks everyone should live the way she thinks is proper. Been trying to tell me how to run my life since Sarah died. I've gotten good at not listening." They rode in silence for a while. Clara watched the town disappear behind them, swallowed by distance and dust. "For what it's worth," Ethan said eventually, "I don't care what they think either. You're doing honest work for honest pay. That's the end of it, far as I'm concerned." "Thank you." "Don't thank me, just stating facts." He paused. "But if the talk bothers you, you can always stay at the ranch when I go to town. Sam can get anything you need." "No." Clara surprised herself with how firm her voice was. "I'm not hiding. I didn't do anything wrong." Ethan glanced at her, and something in his expression shifted. Respect, maybe? Or recognition. "All right then," he said. "Your choice." They didn't speak again until the ranch came into view, and Clara felt something settle in her chest. Not quite belonging, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. The possibility, at least, of building something that couldn't be taken away by gossip or judgment or locked gates. That night she wrote a letter she'd never send. "Dear Thomas, you were right to leave me at that gate. Not because I wasn't good enough for you. I see now that I was too good. You wanted someone who would accept cruelty quietly, who would make herself small to fit your small life. I would have broken trying to be that person. So thank you. For being a coward. For riding away. For forcing me to become someone stronger than the woman who stepped off that train expecting kindness. I hope you choke on your regrets. Clara." She burned it in the stove and watched the paper curl and blacken, releasing her anger into smoke. Tomorrow, she'd wake at 5. Make breakfast. Clean. Cook dinner. Do the work that kept her fed and sheltered and free. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. It was better. Because it was hers. Winter came early that year, and it came mean. The first snow hit in mid-November, 3 weeks after Clara had arrived. She woke to a world gone white and silent, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural after the constant wind. From her window, she could see nothing but snow, covering the ground, the fence posts, the roof of the barn, everything erased under a blank sheet. Ethan was already up, building the fire back to life when she came out. He glanced at her, then back at the stove. "Storm's going to last 2, maybe 3 days," he said. "We're snowed in until it passes." Clara moved to the window. The world outside looked alien. "How can you tell how long it'll last?" "You learn." He straightened, rolling that bad shoulder. "Smell in the air, way the wind hits. Lived here long enough, you start reading weather like other people read newspapers. And we're prepared for 3 days? We're fine. Got food, got wood, got shelter." He poured coffee. "Cattle are another story. I need to get to the south pasture, make sure they're not bunched up against the fence line. If they drift too far in this, we'll lose half the herd." Clara took the coffee he handed her. "You're going out in this?" "Don't have a choice. That's insane. You can't even see 10 feet. That's why I'm leaving now, while I still know where I'm going." He pulled on his heavy coat, wrapped a scarf around his face. "Keep the fire going. If I'm not back by dark, don't panic. Sometimes it takes longer than you think." "Ethan, I've done this before." He met her eyes. "I'll be fine." Then he was gone, swallowed by white. Clara stood at the window watching until she couldn't see him anymore, which took about 5 seconds. The snow fell thick and fast, erasing his tracks almost as soon as he made them. She spent the day trying not to worry, baked bread, cleaned things that didn't need cleaning, checked the fire every 20 minutes, even though it was burning fine. The clock on the mantel ticked away the hours with excruciating slowness. By 4 o'clock, the light was already failing. By 5, it was full dark, and Ethan wasn't back. Clara told herself not to panic. He'd said it might take longer. He knew what he was doing. But her mind kept creating disasters. Him lost in the white, his horse breaking a leg, him frozen somewhere between here and the south pasture while she sat in a warm house doing nothing. She made stew, let it simmer, made more coffee, stared out the window at nothing but darkness and snow. At 7:30 she heard something, not quite a knock, more like something heavy hitting the door. She ran to open it. Ethan half fell inside, bringing a gust of snow and cold air with him. His face was ice-crusted, his movements stiff. Clara grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the stove. "Sit down." "I'm fine." "You're half frozen. Sit." She pushed him into the chair and started unwrapping the scarf from his face. His skin was dangerously pale, lips tinged blue. What happened? Horse went lame, had to walk back. His words came out slurred, teeth chattering. Took longer than I thought. You could have died out there. But I didn't. He tried to stand. Need to get the horse. The horse can wait. You need to warm up before you lose fingers. Clara pulled his gloves off. His hands were white, and when she touched them, they felt like ice. Can you feel this? Barely. She grabbed a basin, filled it with water from the reservoir, warm but not hot, and plunged his hands in. Ethan hissed, I know it hurts. Keep them in there. She went for blankets, wrapped them around his shoulders. Where's the horse? Barn. I got him that far before I came in. Is he injured badly? Stepped wrong in a drift. Might just be strain, might be worse. Ethan's shivering was getting worse now that he was warming up. I'll check him once I can feel my hands. You're not going back out tonight. Clara, I'll check the horse. You're going to sit here and drink hot coffee until you stop looking like a corpse. She was already putting on her coat. You don't know what to look for. Then tell me. He stared at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. It's a blizzard out there. And you just walked through it for 3 hours. I think I can make it 30 feet to the barn. She wrapped her scarf tight. Tell me what to check. So he did. Explained where to run her hands down the horse's legs, what heat or swelling might mean, how to tell if it was serious. Clara listened, committed it to memory, and went out into the storm before she could think better of it. The 30 feet to the barn felt like 30 miles. The wind tried to knock her sideways. Snow stung her face like thrown sand. She kept one hand on the guide rope Ethan had strung between the house and barn. Without it, she'd have been lost in seconds. The barn was dark and somehow colder than outside. She found the lantern where Ethan said it would be, got it lit on the third try with shaking hands. The horse stood in the first stall, favoring his left front leg. Hey there, Clara said softly. The horse's ears flicked toward her. Let's see what you did to yourself. She ran her hands down the leg the way Ethan had described. The horse shifted but didn't pull away. There was heat above the fetlock, but not severe, no obvious swelling. When she flexed the joint gently, the horse didn't react badly. Probably strain, like Ethan had thought. Not good, but not catastrophic. She gave the horse feed and water, checked that the other animals were settled, and made the journey back to the house. This time, she knew what to expect from the wind. It didn't make it easier, just less shocking. Ethan was still at the stove, though he'd moved to actually drink the coffee she'd left him. His color was better. The dangerous pallor had faded to something closer to normal. Well, Sam, he asked. Heat above the left fetlock, no major swelling. He didn't flinch when I flexed it. She unwrapped her scarf. I think you're right. Strain. You checked the joint? I'm not an idiot, Ethan. You told me what to look for. I looked for it. She hung her coat by the stove to dry. He needs rest. How long? Week, maybe 2 if we're careful. Ethan set down his cup. That was a stupid thing to do, going out there. Funny. I was thinking the same thing about you. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, of the fact that they were both stubborn in ways that could get them killed. Ethan's mouth twitched. Fair enough. He stood, testing his legs. They held. Thank you for checking on him. You're welcome. They ate stew in silence, and outside the storm howled on. The snow lasted 3 days, just like Ethan had predicted. They were trapped together in the small house with nowhere to go and nothing to do but work and wait. Clara had expected it to be awkward. 2 people who barely knew each other, forced into constant proximity. But somehow, it wasn't. They fell into an easy rhythm. Ethan would handle the heavy work, bringing in wood, checking on the animals, shoveling paths when the snow let up enough. Clara cooked, cleaned, and kept the house warm. In the evenings, they'd sit by the stove, and gradually, Ethan started talking. Not about anything important at first, just observations. The way the snow drifted differently this year, how the cattle had moved to the sheltered valleys. Small things. But slowly, the conversation deepened. On the second night, Clara asked about Sarah. She'd been thinking about the photograph on the shelf, about the way Ethan had talked about bringing his wife west against her wishes. It felt intrusive to ask, but the question had been sitting in her throat for weeks. What was she like? Your wife? Ethan was quiet for so long, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, delicate. That's the word people used. She grew up in Boston, good family, educated. Met her when I was back east buying cattle. He stared at the stove. She was beautiful, kind, everything I wasn't. Why did she marry you? I asked myself that every day we were together. A humorless smile. She said she wanted adventure, said she was tired of parlors and tea parties and being treated like a decoration. Thought Montana would be different. Was it? It was different, just not the way she hoped. He rolled his shoulder absently. She tried. I'll give her that. Tried to learn cooking, gardening, everything. But this land, it's not kind to people who aren't built for it. And Sarah, she was built for softer things. Did she hate it here? Toward the end, yes. She wanted to go home. I said we couldn't afford it yet. Said once the ranch was profitable, we'd visit. His voice went flat. Then she got sick. 3 days like I told you. By the time I got a doctor out here, it was too late. Clara didn't say she was sorry again. She'd learned that Ethan didn't want sympathy. Do you regret bringing her here? Every day. He looked at Clara then. I loved her, but love doesn't excuse selfishness. I wanted this life, this land. She wanted me. I should have chosen her. Would you have been happy, back east? No, but she'd be alive. That's the trade I should have made. Bamiam, mechep bachamim. The fire crackled. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. My mother used to say that we can't live other people's lives for them, Clara said. Even when we love them. Sarah made her choice too, to marry you, to come here. She didn't know what she was choosing. Maybe not, but she chose it anyway. Clara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. You can regret it, but you can't carry all the blame. That's not fair to either of you. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. How'd you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of watching people torture themselves over things they can't change. She thought of her father, of Thomas Wardell, of all the ways people had failed her. The past is done. All we've got is what's in front of us. And what's in front of you? I don't know yet. Clara met his eyes. But I'm figuring it out. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Yeah, I think you are. On the third day, the storm broke. Clara woke to silence, real silence, without wind, and pale sunlight filtering through the cracks in the shutters. When she opened them, the world was blindingly white but clear. Ethan was already outside, digging paths. Sam showed up around noon, riding in on a mule and complaining loudly about the drifts. Together, the three of them dug out the barn, checked the cattle, assessed the damage. They'd lost 2 steers. Not terrible, but not good. Ethan's jaw was tight when he came back to the house. Could have been worse, Sam said over lunch, shouting so he could hear himself. Last big storm, Patterson lost 20 head. Patterson's got twice the herd I do. He can afford 20. Ethan pushed food around his plate. I can't afford 2. Clara looked up from her own plate. Are things that tight? Tight enough? He didn't elaborate, but she could read the tension in his shoulders. After Sam left, Clara cornered Ethan in the barn. Tell me about the finances. Nothing to tell. We're managing. Ethan, he sighed, setting down the pitchfork. Ranch barely breaks even most years. I've got enough saved to cover emergencies, but not much past that. Lost cattle means lost money come spring sale. It's not critical, just not great. Let me see the books. Why? Because you said you needed someone who could handle accounts. Let me handle them. He studied her face. You know bookkeeping? I worked for a milliner in Philadelphia for 2 years, kept her books, managed her orders, dealt with suppliers. I know numbers. Clara crossed her arms. Let me help. Books are in the desk in my room, top drawer. He picked up the pitchfork again. Don't say I didn't warn you. It's a mess. It was worse than a mess. It was chaos. Receipts mixed with estimates, mixed with random notes scrawled on whatever paper had been handy. No clear system. No way to track what was owed versus what was paid. Clara sat at Ethan's desk, feeling like an intruder in his private space, and started sorting. It took her 2 full days to make sense of it. When she was done, she had a clear picture of the ranch's finances, and it wasn't pretty. Ethan was right. They were barely breaking even. One bad year, one disaster, and the whole operation could collapse. But there were opportunities too. Things he was spending money on that could be done cheaper. Ways to negotiate better prices in town. Small efficiencies that could add up. She laid it all out for him over dinner. Ethan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat back and looked at the papers spread across the table. You did all this in 2 days? It's not complicated once you organize it. It's been a disaster for 5 years. I'd call that complicated. He picked up one of the summary sheets she'd made. These savings, you think they're realistic? If we're smart about it, yes. We. He set the paper down. When did it become we? Clara felt heat creep up her neck. I meant you. Obviously. It's your ranch. No, you were right the first time. Ethan met her eyes. You're putting in the work. You should get credit for it. He paused. And a raise, say, $20 a month instead of $15. You can't afford. If your numbers are right, I can. Especially if you keep the books like this. He gestured at the organized papers. Deal? Clara felt something warm unfold in her chest. Not quite belonging, but close. Deal. They shook on it, and Clara tried not to notice how his hand felt around hers. Solid, calloused, real. December came in cold and stayed that way. The work settled into a routine that Clara found herself adapting to more easily than she'd expected. Wake before dawn, make breakfast. Ethan would head out to check cattle or repair fences or do whatever needed doing. She'd clean, cook, manage the books. Sam would show up twice a week, eat everything in sight, and help with the heavy work. Evenings were quiet, dinner, then time by the stove before bed. It was a simple life. Hard, but honest. And Clara was surprised to find she didn't hate it. What she did hate was town. The second trip to Collier Creek was worse than the first. Mrs. Patterson had clearly been talking because the stares were more blatant, the whispers less subtle. The shopkeeper was coolly polite. The woman at the post office asked pointed questions about how Clara was managing living so far from town. Even Sam noticed. They're a bunch of biddies with nothing better to do, he shouted at her in the wagon on the way home. Ignore 'em. I'm trying. Not hard enough if it's bothering you. He adjusted his grip on the reins. Hale's good people. Anyone with sense knows that. Rest of 'em can go hang. But it did bother her. Not because she cared what they thought. She'd meant what she said to Mrs. Patterson about ignoring judgment. But because she could see how it affected Ethan. The way his shoulders would tense when they walked down the main street together. The way he'd cut conversations short with people who'd been friendly before. He was being marked by association with her, and he didn't deserve that. She tried to bring it up one night. Maybe I shouldn't come to town with you anymore. Ethan looked up from the harness he was mending. Why not? Because people talk, and it's affecting you. People have always talked, long before you showed up. He went back to the leather. After Sarah died, they talked about how I killed her by bringing her west. When I didn't remarry within a year, they talked about that. When I hired Sam instead of one of their nephews, they talked. That's what small towns do. But I'm making it worse. You're making it different, not worse. He tested the repair. Besides, if I cared what Patterson and her crew thought, I'd have left years ago. I don't. So neither should you. Easy for you to say. You've got history here, roots. I'm just what? Temporary. A housekeeper who showed up because she had nowhere else to go. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. They see me as charity, as something you're stuck with. Ethan set down the harness and looked at her directly. You think that's what this is? Charity? Isn't it? No. Flat, certain. Charity is what you do for people out of pity. This is business. You work, I pay you. You're good at the work, so I keep you on. That's not charity, that's employment. But you want to know what I think? He didn't wait for an answer. I think you're letting other people's opinions get in your head because part of you still believes what Wardell told you. that you're not worth keeping, that you're someone to be left behind. The words hit like a slap. Clara felt her throat tighten. That's not... It is. And it's bullshit. Ethan stood. You're the best thing that's happened to this ranch in years. You've organized chaos into something manageable. You cook better than anyone I know. You went out in a blizzard to check on a horse because it needed doing. You're not temporary, Clara. You're just scared to believe you might be permanent. Silence hung between them. I don't know how to be permanent, Clara said finally, quietly. Everyone I've ever relied on has either died or left or proven they were never reliable in the first place. I don't know how to trust that this, she gestured at the house, at him, is real. Then figure it out, because I'm not going anywhere, and neither is the work that needs doing. He picked up the harness again. Stay or go, that's your choice. But if you stay, stop acting like you're waiting for permission to belong here. You already do. He walked out to the barn, leaving Clara alone with his words echoing in the quiet house. She sat at the table for a long time, staring at nothing. Then she got up, went to her room, and pulled out the box where she'd been keeping her wages. $20 from November, 20 more coming for December. $40 total. More money than she'd had since her mother died. She could leave. Buy a train ticket east, try to start over somewhere new. Philadelphia maybe, or New York. Find work, build a different life. Or she could stay. The choice should have been harder. But sitting there in the small room with the faded quilt and the window looking out over land that was starting to feel familiar, Clara realized she'd already decided. She was tired of running, tired of starting over, tired of being temporary. For better or worse, this was home now. The realization should have scared her. Instead, it felt like setting down weight she'd been carrying for miles. Christmas came quiet. No celebration, no fuss. Ethan had made it clear years ago he didn't do holidays and Clara didn't push. But she made a better dinner than usual, roast chicken, potatoes, bread with honey. Small things. Ethan noticed. What's the occasion? Does there need to be one? He looked at the table, at the effort she'd put in, and something softened in his expression. I suppose not. He paused. Thank you. After dinner, he disappeared to his room and came back with a package wrapped in brown paper. What's this? Clara asked. Open it. Inside was a book, thick, leather-bound, expensive, a comprehensive guide to ranching and animal husbandry. Clara ran her hand over the cover. Ethan, I can't. This must have cost. You wanted to learn. Now you can. He looked almost embarrassed. Figured if you're going to be keeping books, might as well understand what the numbers mean. Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back hard. Thank you. I didn't get you anything. You gave me organized books and decent food for 2 months. That's gift enough. He stood. I'm heading to the barn. Enjoy the book. After he left, Clara sat holding the heavy volume and trying to remember the last time someone had given her something that mattered. Not obligatory, not expected, just because they'd thought she might want it. She couldn't. That night she started reading. By February, she'd finished it cover to cover and started applying what she'd learned to her understanding of the ranch's operations. The numbers made more sense now. She could see patterns, anticipate needs, make better decisions. Ethan noticed, started asking her opinion on things, whether to sell certain cattle now or wait for spring, whether to invest in new equipment or make do with what they had. Her answers were thoughtful, informed. He started trusting them. The work became partnership. Slowly, without either of them quite naming it, Clara stopped being just the housekeeper and became something more integral to the ranch's operations. And then, in mid-February, Thomas Wardell came back. Clara was kneading bread when she heard the horse. Not Ethan's. She knew the sound of his gelding by now, the particular rhythm of its hooves. This was different, unfamiliar. She wiped flour from her hands and moved to the window. A rider was approaching the house, still too far away to identify, but something about the way he sat in the saddle made her stomach tighten with recognition she didn't want to acknowledge. By the time he reached the porch, she knew. Thomas Wardell dismounted and stood there looking at the house like he was gathering courage. He'd lost weight since November. His face was thinner, harder. When he finally knocked, Clara had to force herself to open the door. They stared at each other across the threshold. "Clara," his voice was rough. "I need to talk to you." "No." "Please. Just 5 minutes." "I said no." She started to close the door. He put his hand against it, not forcing, just stopping. "It's about Hale and water rights. You need to hear this." That made her pause. "What about water rights?" "Can I come in?" Clara glanced past him. No one else in sight. Ethan was at the north pasture and wouldn't be back until evening. She shouldn't let Thomas in. Every instinct told her to slam the door and forget he existed. But if this involved Ethan's water rights, she needed to know. She stepped back. 5 minutes, then you leave." Thomas came in slowly, like he expected her to change her mind. He looked around the kitchen, at the bread dough on the counter, the stew simmering on the stove, Sarah's photograph on the shelf. His expression was hard to read. "You've done well here," he said. "I'm surviving. What do you want?" He turned to face her. "There's a man, calls himself Garrett, bought the Morrison place 2 months ago. You know it?" "The ranch east of here." Clara had heard Ethan mention it. Old Morrison had died last fall, leaving no heirs. The land had been for sale. "Right. Well, Garrett's not just a rancher. He's connected, rich, and he's been buying up water rights all winter." Thomas's jaw worked. "He approached me 3 weeks ago, offered to buy mine." "Did you sell?" "No, but I'm thinking about it." He looked away. "The price he's offering. It's more than my whole ranch is worth. I could pay off everything I owe and still have money left." Clara felt cold settling in her chest. "And if you sell, what happens to the downstream ranchers who use that water?" "That's not my problem. It's Ethan's problem. His cattle drink from Miller Creek. If Garrett controls the headwaters, then Hale will have to negotiate with Garrett or find another source." Thomas met her eyes. "I came here because I thought you should know. Before it happens." "How generous of you." The words came out sharp. "You want me to thank you for warning us that you're about to destroy Ethan's livelihood?" "I'm trying to do the right thing here. The right thing would be refusing to sell to someone who's clearly trying to corner the water supply." Clara crossed her arms. "But that would require thinking about someone other than yourself." Thomas flinched. "You don't understand. I'm buried in debt. My ranch is failing. This is my way out." "Your way out ruins other people. You understand that, right? One person, maybe two. Small ranchers who are struggling anyway." He shook his head. "The land's changing, Clara. The big operations are taking over. Garrett's just speeding up what would happen anyway. So you're just helping history along. I'm surviving, same as you." He gestured at the kitchen. "You think I don't know why you're here? You took this job because you were desperate. Don't pretend you're better than me." The accusation hung in the air between them. Clara wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that her choice was different, but the truth sat heavy in her throat. She had taken this job out of desperation. She'd had nowhere else to go. The difference was what she'd done with that choice. "You're right," she said finally. "I was desperate, but I've worked for what I have here, earned it. I haven't taken it from someone else." She moved toward the door. "Your 5 minutes are up." Thomas didn't move. "I thought you'd want to know. That's why I came." "Why?" "So I could talk you out of it. So you could feel better about screwing over your neighbors because at least you warned them first?" Clara pulled the door open. "You didn't come here for me. You came here for yourself, to ease your conscience." "Maybe." He walked to the door, paused on the threshold. "For what it's worth, I am sorry about November, about leaving you like that. Save it. I panicked. I'd been writing to you for months, building up this picture in my head of what it would be like. Then you actually showed up and I couldn't do it. Couldn't be what you needed. I didn't need much, just honesty, basic decency." Clara felt anger warming her words. "But you couldn't even manage that." Thomas nodded slowly. "I know, doesn't change anything, but I know." He stepped off the porch. "The sale's happening next week. I thought Hale should prepare." He rode away without looking back, and Clara stood in the doorway watching him disappear, her hands shaking with anger she couldn't quite direct. At Thomas for his weakness, at Garrett for his greed, at herself for caring. When Ethan came home that evening, she told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his face getting harder with each sentence. When she finished, he sat down heavily at the table. "You're sure about this? About Wardell selling?" "That's what he said." "Damn." Ethan rubbed his face. "Miller Creek supplies half my water. If Garrett controls it, he can cut me off whenever he wants, or charge so much I can't afford it. Can you drill a well? Not deep enough to sustain the herd. The water table's too low here." He stared at the table. "I'd have to move the cattle to the east pasture full time. That land's not good enough to support them year-round. What about buying your own water rights upstream from Garrett? With what money? It took everything I had to buy this land. There's nothing left for water rights." His hands curled into fists. "And Garrett knows it. That's why he's doing this. Buy up the water, force the small ranchers out, get their land cheap when they can't sustain operations." Clara sat down across from him. "There has to be something we can do." "We?" He looked at her. "You know what I mean." "Yeah, I do." He was quiet for a moment. "There might be one option. Legal challenge. Water rights law is murky out here. If I can prove prior use, argue that cutting off my access violates established practice. That would take months and lawyers, and money I don't have." Ethan stood, started pacing. "But it might be the only play. Tie it up in court long enough, maybe Garrett backs off, decides it's not worth the fight. Or he digs in and bleeds you dry with legal fees. Yeah, that's the risk." He stopped pacing. "I need to talk to some people, see what my options are. I'm coming with you." "Clara, you said this affects the ranch. I keep the ranch's books. That makes it my business too." She met his eyes. "I'm coming." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "All right, we'll go to town tomorrow. Talk to the land office, maybe find a lawyer who'll take the case." They went to Collier Creek at first light. The land office was a cramped room above the general store, run by a bureaucrat named Henderson who looked like he'd been born irritated. He listened to Ethan's explanation with a face that suggested he'd heard it all before. "Water rights are first come, first served in this territory," Henderson said. "If Wardell sells to Garrett, and Garrett files properly, there's nothing you can do. I've been using that water for 7 years. Doesn't matter if Wardell owns the rights. He can sell them to whoever he wants." Henderson shuffled papers on his desk. "You want to challenge it? You need a lawyer. Good luck finding one who'll work for what you can pay." They tried 3 lawyers. The first laughed them out of his office. The second listened politely and said he was too busy. The third, a younger man named Robert Chen, who'd only been in town 6 months, actually seemed interested. "It's a long shot," Chen said. "But there might be an argument here. Common law doctrine of prior appropriation. If you can prove continuous use, and that cutting off access would cause irreparable harm." "How much would it cost?" Ethan interrupted. Chen hesitated. "Depends how long it drags out. Initial filing, maybe $50. If it goes to court, could be hundreds, maybe more." Ethan's expression went flat. "I don't have hundreds." "Then I'm sorry, I can't help you." They left the office and stood on the boardwalk in silence. Clara could see the defeat settling into Ethan's shoulders, the way he was already calculating losses, already preparing to give up. "We'll find another way," she said. "There is no other way. Garrett's got money, lawyers, everything. I've got debt and dying cattle." He started toward where they'd left the wagon. "It's over." "Stop." He turned. "Clara, I have money." That stopped him. "What?" "Savings. From my wages. Not much, but maybe enough for the initial filing." She pulled him aside, away from the people passing on the street. "Let me help." "Absolutely not." "Ethan, that's your money. For emergencies. For getting out if you need to." His voice was firm. "I'm not taking it. It's not your choice. It's mine." Clara felt her own stubbornness rising to meet his. "This ranch kept me alive when I had nothing. If it fails, I lose everything too. So yes, this is my fight as much as yours. If we lose in court, you lose that money. All of it. Then we won't lose. You can't know that." "No, but I know that doing nothing guarantees we lose." She grabbed his arm. "Let me do this, please." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head, but there was something softer in his expression. You're as stubborn as the land. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't meant as one. He sighed. All right, but this is a loan, not a gift. I pay you back when the ranch is profitable. If that makes you feel better, fine. They went back to Chen's office and paid for the filing. The lawyer promised to have the paperwork ready within a week. It wasn't much, but it was something. On the ride home, Ethan was quiet. Clara left him alone with his thoughts until they were almost back to the ranch. Thank you, he said finally. You already said that. I mean it. He glanced at her. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I did. Clara looked at the land rolling past, at the ranch buildings coming into view. This is home now. You made that possible. The least I can do is fight for it. Home. Ethan tested the word. That's what this is for you? Yes. Simple. True. He nodded slowly. Good. That's good. They didn't speak again until they reached the barn, but something had shifted between them. An understanding, maybe. Or just the acknowledgement that they were in this together, for better or worse. The legal papers were filed 3 days later. Garrett's response came within a week, a counterfiling claiming the challenge was baseless and demanding it be thrown out. Chen assured them this was normal, expected. The judge would review both sides and make a ruling. That would take weeks, maybe months. In the meantime, life went on. Cattle needed feeding, fences needed mending, the books needed keeping. Claire and Ethan fell back into their routine, but with an edge of tension that hadn't been there before. They were waiting. And waiting was its own kind of torture. March came in wet, rain that should have been snow, turning the ground to mud. The cattle bogged down in the low pastures. One of the outbuildings sprung a leak. Everything felt harder, meaner. And through it all, they could see Garrett's ranch in the distance, new buildings going up, cattle being driven in, signs of money, expansion, confidence. Sam noticed. "Man's building an empire," he shouted one afternoon, watching Garrett's work crew raise a new barn. "And he don't care who he steps on to do it." "He'll care when the judge rules against him," Clara said. "If the judge rules against him." Sam spat into the mud. "Rich men usually get what they want. That's how the world works." "Not always. Often enough." Sam turned back to the fence he was repairing. "I seen it before." Big rancher moves in, starts squeezing the small folks. Year later, he owns half the county and the small folks are gone. History repeats. Clara wanted to argue what, but she'd seen enough of the world to know Sam wasn't wrong. Money had weight. It bent things, laws, people, outcomes. But sometimes stubborn people pushed back. That night she worked on the books late, trying to find efficiencies that would help if, when, water access became a problem. She was so focused, she didn't hear Ethan come in until he spoke. "You should sleep." Clara looked up. He stood in the doorway, still wearing his work clothes, covered in mud from checking the south fence line. "I could say the same to you. I slept for about 2 hours. Then I started thinking." He moved into the kitchen, poured coffee from the pot she'd kept warm. "About what happens if we lose." "We won't. You don't know that." "Neither do you." Clara set down her pencil. "So we prepare for both. If we win, we're fine. If we lose, I have to sell. There's no way to sustain operations without that water." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "I've been running numbers. Even if I move all the cattle east, even if I cut expenses to nothing, I can't make it work long term. So we find another way." "There is no other way, Clara." He sat down across from her, looking more tired than she'd ever seen him. "I've been fighting this land for 7 years, trying to make something work on margins too thin to matter. Sarah knew. That's why she wanted to leave. She saw what I wouldn't admit, that this place was killing us slowly. This place didn't kill her. Fever did. Fever I couldn't get treated because the doctor was 40 miles away, and we couldn't afford to have him come sooner." Ethan's hands curled around the coffee cup. "It's all connected, the isolation, the poverty, the constant struggle. This land takes and takes until there's nothing left." Clara felt something fierce rise in her chest. "Then we take something back. How?" I don't know yet, but giving up isn't an option. She leaned forward. You told me I was too scared to believe I could be permanent. Well, maybe you're too scared to believe this place can be more than what killed Sarah, that it can actually work. That's not fair. Truth usually isn't. She held his gaze. You've been punishing yourself for 7 years, using this ranch as penance. Maybe it's time to start using it as something else. Like what? Like a life worth fighting for. The silence stretched between them. Outside, rain drummed on the roof. I don't know how to do that, Ethan said finally, quietly. Neither do I, but we can figure it out. Clara reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. Together. He looked at their hands, then at her face. Something complicated moved behind his eyes. Grief, hope, fear, something she couldn't name. When he spoke, his voice was rough. You should go to bed. Morning comes early. It wasn't what she'd expected him to say, but she recognized dismissal when she heard it. Clara pulled her hand back, gathered her papers, and went to her room without another word. She lay awake for a long time, listening to him move around the kitchen, eventually hearing his door close. The house settled into silence. The next morning, they didn't talk about it. Went back to routine. Work, meals, evening quiet. Like the conversation had never happened. But something had changed. Clara felt it in the careful way Ethan avoided being alone with her, and how his eyes would catch on her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. In the space between them that felt charged with things neither of them knew how to say. 2 weeks later, the judge's ruling came. Chen rode out to the ranch himself, which told Clara everything before he even spoke. Lawyers didn't make house calls for good news. I'm sorry, Chen said. The judge threw it out, said Wardell's water rights are clear and his sale to Garrett is legal. Your claim of prior use doesn't override ownership. Ethan took it like a punch. Clara watched his face go blank, watched him retreat behind walls she recognized now. So that's it, he said. Garrett wins. You could appeal. Higher court might see it differently. With what money? Chen had no answer for that. After he left, Ethan went to the barn and didn't come back. Clara gave him space, but as evening fell and he still hadn't returned, she went looking. She found him in the empty stall where his lame horse had recovered months ago, sitting on the ground with his back against the wall. He looked up when she came in. Come to tell me to keep fighting? No, I came to sit with you. She lowered herself to the ground beside him. Fighting can wait until tomorrow. They sat in silence for a while. The barn smelled like hay and horses and the particular dusty scent of old wood. Somewhere overhead, swallows nested in the rafters. I thought we had a chance, Ethan said. Stupid, but I did. It wasn't stupid. We're going to lose everything. Maybe, or maybe something else happens. Clara leaned her head back against the wall. Water's not sold yet. Wardell could still change his mind. He won't. He needs the money too badly. Then we find a way to work with Garrett. Negotiate access. Men like Garrett don't negotiate. They dictate terms. Ethan's laugh was bitter. I should have known better. Should have sold when I had the chance, before Sarah died, before all of this. Would you have been happier? I'd have been somewhere else. That's close enough. Clara turned to look at him. I don't believe that. I think you love this place, even when you hate it. I think leaving would have killed something in you just as surely as staying killed something in Sarah. Some choices don't have good options, just less bad ones. And some choices aren't finished yet. She stood, brushed hay from her skirt. Come inside, I'll make dinner, then we'll figure out what comes next. There is no next, Clara. There's always a next, even when we can't see it. She extended her hand. Come on. After a long moment, he took it, let her pull him up. They walked back to the house together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. That night, Clara lay in bed thinking about water and money and the way systems were built to favor people who already had power, about judges who ruled based on ownership rather than need, about men like Garrett who saw land as commodity rather than life, and about the fact that in 3 weeks, Thomas Wardell would sign papers that would effectively end everything she'd built here. Unless something changed. The idea came to her around midnight. It was risky, probably wouldn't work. but it was something. She got up, lit the lamp, and started making notes. By dawn, she had a plan. Clara found Ethan in the barn at sunrise, already working through morning chores with mechanical efficiency. He looked up when she approached, hayfork in hand. "We need to talk to the other ranchers," she said without preamble. He went back to pitching hay. "About what?" "About Garrett. About water." She moved closer. "We're not the only ones affected. Miller Creek runs through 3 other properties downstream. If Garrett cuts us off, he cuts them off too." "I know that. So maybe we're not fighting this alone. Maybe if we pool resources, get everyone together, they won't help." Ethan's voice was flat. "I already know what they'll say." "You haven't asked." "Don't need to. People out here look after their own. I'm not their own." He drove the fork into the hay pile. "Besides, most of them think I had it coming. The strange woman living in my house, the legal fight, all of it. They'll watch me fail and call it justice." Clara felt anger spark. "That's giving up before you've even tried. That's being realistic. No, that's being a coward." The word hung in the air between them. Ethan turned slowly, his expression dangerous. "Say that again." Clara held her ground. "You heard me. You're being a coward. Sarah's been gone 7 years, and you're still using her death as an excuse to not try, to not hope, to not ask for help, because if you never ask, you never have to face rejection." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? I was left at a locked gate with nothing. At least you had a choice. You could have reached out to neighbors, built alliances, created community. Instead, you've spent 7 years proving to yourself that isolation is safer than connection." She stepped closer. "Well, guess what? Isolation is killing you just as surely as this land killed Sarah. Maybe faster." Ethan's jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. "Get out." "No." "Clara, we're going to talk to the other ranchers today. You can come with me or I'll go alone, but it's happening." She crossed her arms. "Your choice." They stared at each other. Clara could see him warring with himself, pride against desperation, anger against the small, stubborn hope that maybe she was right. Finally, he threw the hayfork down. "Fine, we'll go. But when they tell us to leave, don't say I didn't warn you." They started with the Jacobsons, whose land bordered Ethan's to the south. The ranch was smaller than Ethan's, the house weathered but neat. Mrs. Jacobson answered the door, a woman in her 50s with work-rough hands and suspicious eyes. "Hail," she said. Didn't look at Clara at all. "What do you want?" "To talk about water rights. And Garrett." Ethan's voice was stiff. "Can we come in?" Mrs. Jacobson considered, then stepped back. 5 minutes. The kitchen was cramped, every surface covered with evidence of a working ranch, tack needing repair, seed catalogs, children's schoolwork. Mr. Jacobson sat at the table, a lean man with premature gray and a face carved by weather. He nodded at Ethan but said nothing. Ethan explained the situation, Garrett buying Wardell's water rights, the failed legal challenge, the fact that come April, Miller Creek access would be controlled by a man who had no reason to share. "And you think this affects us how, Mr.?" Jacobson asked. "Miller Creek runs through your land too," Clara said. "If he cuts Ethan off, he can cut you off. Today it's upstream rights. Tomorrow it's something else. He's buying up land piece by piece. We don't use Miller Creek much, got wells. For now, but if Garrett keeps expanding, keeps buying, then maybe we sell too." Mrs. Jacobson crossed her arms. "Get out before he pushes us out. That's how it works." "Or we push back," Clara said, "together." "With what?" "Mister." Jacobson's laugh was bitter. "We're barely making it as is. You think we got money for lawyers?" "I'm not talking about lawyers. I'm talking about leverage." Clara pulled out the notes she'd made. "Garrett wants to build an empire. Empires need workers, infrastructure, supplies. What if the whole county refuses to work with him? No one sells him goods, no one hires on, no cooperation at all." "That's a boycott," Mrs. Jacobson said. "Won't work. Someone always breaks. Not if there's incentive to hold together. Not if we create an alternative." Clara leaned forward. "What if we form a cooperative? Pool resources, share equipment, negotiate as a group instead of individuals. Garrett can't buy us all out if we're stronger united." Silence. The Jacobsons looked at each other. "It's an interesting idea. Mr. Jacobson said slowly. But who'd run it? Who'd we trust not to favor their own interests? We'd vote, make decisions together. Well, Clara could see them considering it. I know it's not perfect, but it's better than giving up without a fight. Mrs. Jacobson turned to Ethan. This your idea or hers? Hers. You agree with it? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, yeah, I do. Well, Mrs. Jacobson seemed to reassess them both. That's something then. Hale actually asking for help instead of going it alone. She looked at her husband. What do you think? I think it's crazy. But so is letting Garrett run us all off. He stood, extended a hand to Ethan. You get 3 more ranchers on board, we'll consider it. They left with cautious hope and went to the next ranch. And the next. By evening, they'd talked to 7 families. 2 flat out refused. 3 were skeptical but willing to listen. 2, the Jacobsons and a young couple named the Chens who'd just bought land last year, were actually interested. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had that morning. That night, Clara made a list of what they'd need. Formal structure for the cooperative, legal paperwork, a way to pool resources without losing individual ownership. It was complicated, messy, but possible. Ethan sat across from her, drinking coffee and watching her work. Finally, he spoke. I was wrong. Earlier. Clara looked up. About what? You're not a coward. You're probably the bravest person I know. He paused. And I'm sorry for what I said. You were scared. People say stupid things when they're scared. That's not an excuse. No, but it's an explanation. She set down her pencil. Are you still scared? Terrified. This plan might not work. Probably won't work. He met her eyes. But at least we're trying. That's more than I've done in a long time. Then we're making progress. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or just the acknowledgement that they'd crossed some invisible line together. Clara felt it settle in her chest, warm and complicated. The next morning, Sam rode in looking grim. You heard? Heard what? Ethan asked. Garrett's damming up the headwaters. Started yesterday. Says he's within his rights since he's buying Wardell's land next week. Sam spat. Means Miller Creek's going to slow to a trickle by the time it reaches your land. Clara felt cold wash through her. He's cutting us off before he even owns the rights? Apparently. And there's nothing we can do about it legally. Wardell's letting him start early in exchange for faster payment. Ethan's expression went dark. Where exactly is he building this dam? Up past Widow's Ridge, big operation. He's got 20 men working on it. Sam shifted in his saddle. Word is it'll be done in 3 days. 3 days. After that, the cattle would start suffering. A week, and they'd be in real trouble. Clara looked at Ethan. We need to see it. They rode out within the hour, Clara on one of the ranch horses she'd learned to manage over the winter. The ride to Widow's Ridge took most of the morning, climbing into rocky terrain where the creek ran fast and clear between stone banks. They heard the work before they saw it. Voices shouting, tools striking rock. When they crested the ridge, Clara saw the operation spread below. Garrett had mobilized an army. Men swarmed over the creek bed, hauling stones, building framework for what would become a significant dam. The creek was already partially blocked, water backing up into a pond behind the construction. And standing in the middle of it all, directing workers, was a man Clara assumed was Garrett himself. Tall, well-dressed despite the mud, moving with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. That's him, Ethan confirmed. His voice was tight. Let's go. They rode down carefully, the horses picking their way over loose rock. Several workers stopped to watch them approach. Garrett turned, took them in with a quick, assessing glance, and smiled. Hail. Heard you might show up. He had an Eastern accent, educated. Come to admire the progress? Come to ask what the hell you think you're doing. Ethan dismounted. This is still Wardell's land. You don't own it yet. No, but I will. And Thomas has given me permission to begin preparations. Garrett gestured at the dam. All legal, all above board. Check with your lawyer if you don't believe me. You're cutting off water to 4 ranches downstream. I'm managing a resource that will soon be mine. Garrett's smile didn't waver. Once the sale's complete, we can discuss access arrangements. I'm sure we can come to reasonable terms. Reasonable according to who? According to market rates, supply and demand, basic economics. He turned to one of his workers. Make sure that support is braced properly. Then back to Ethan. Look, I understand you're upset. Change is uncomfortable. But this is progress. The days of scattered small ranches barely surviving are over. Consolidation is the future. Your future, Clara said, not theirs. Garrett looked at her properly for the first time. And you are? Someone who lives here, who's watching you destroy people's livelihoods. I'm not destroying anything. I'm offering them market value for assets they can't properly utilize anyway. His tone was patient, like explaining something to a child. Small-scale ranching is dying. I'm simply helping it along to make room for something more efficient. Something you control, Ethan said. Something that actually works. Yes. Garrett spread his hands. I'm not the villain here. I'm a businessman providing opportunity. Any of you who want to sell, I'm buying. Fair prices, clean transactions, and the ones who don't want to sell? We'll find that independent operation becomes increasingly difficult. That's not a threat, Mr. Hale. That's just reality. He checked his watch. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to supervise. You're welcome to watch, but please stay out of the way. He turned back to his crew, dismissing them. Ethan stood there for a long moment, hands clenched. Clara could see him calculating, running through options. Finally, he remounted his horse. They rode back in silence. When they reached the ranch, Ethan went straight to the barn. Clara followed. We need to stop that dam, she said. Can't. It's legal. Then we make it illegal. We file for an injunction. With what authority? Wardell owns the land. Garrett has permission. Ethan pulled saddle gear down roughly. It's over, Clara. We tried. It didn't work. So we just give up? We accept reality. That's different than giving up. Like hell it is. Clara grabbed his arm, forced him to look at her. 3 days. That's all we've got. If that dam gets finished, it's going to get finished. 20 men working around the clock. There's nothing we can do to stop it. What if there was? Something in her tone made him pause. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that dams need water to be useful, and that creeks have a way of changing course when conditions are right. She met his eyes. What if we redirected the flow? Created a new channel that bypasses his dam entirely? That would take... Ethan stopped. Thought. That would take explosives. Carefully placed to break through the rock shelf upstream, let the water find a new path. Do you know how to do that? I worked in mining before I bought this land. Yeah, I know how. His expression shifted. But it's dangerous and probably illegal. More illegal than what Garrett's doing? Definitely more illegal. If we get caught, we don't get caught. Clara felt her heartbeat quicken. You said the work is happening below Widow's Ridge. What if we go above it? At night? Ethan was quiet, working through logistics. It could work. If we time it right, if the charges are placed correctly, the creek could cut a new channel through softer ground to the east, bypass his dam completely. How long would it take? To set the charges? 2 hours, maybe? To clear out before they blow? Another hour? He shook his head. But this is insane. If anything goes wrong, then we're no worse off than we are now. Clara stepped closer. Ethan, this is our shot. Maybe our only one. He looked at her for a long time. She could see him weighing consequences, calculating risks. Finally, he spoke. If we do this, I do it alone. You stay here. Absolutely not. Clara, you need someone to keep watch, someone to help carry equipment, someone to pull you out if things go bad. She crossed her arms. I'm coming. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. You said it yourself. I'm part of this ranch. That makes it my fight, too. They stared at each other. Finally, Ethan sighed. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. I'll take that as a yes. It's a yes, but we do this my way. You follow my instructions exactly. If I say run, you run. Understood? Understood. Then we leave tomorrow night, new moon. It'll be dark enough to work unseen. He moved toward the house. I need to dig out my old mining gear, and we need to tell Sam what we're planning. Are you sure that's wise? No, but if something goes wrong, someone needs to know where we went. His jaw was set. Besides, Sam's not the type to talk. They told Sam that evening. The old man listened, his face getting more skeptical with every sentence. You're both crazy, he shouted when they finished. You know that, right? Completely insane. Probably, Ethan agreed, and you'll get caught. You go to prison, maybe worse. We won't get caught. And if the explosion goes wrong, if the rock falls the wrong way, if Garrett's got night guards posted. Sam shook his head. This is suicide. This is survival, Clara said quietly. It's all we've got left. Sam looked at her, then at Ethan. You're really doing this? Yes. Then I'm coming with you. Sam, don't argue. You need a lookout. You've got one. I'm half deaf, not half useless. He stood. Besides, someone's got to make sure you two don't blow yourselves up. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but Clara touched his arm. Let him help, she said. After a long moment, Ethan nodded. All right, but you stay well back from the blast site. I'm old, not stupid. Sam headed for the door. I'll bring the mule, quiet and sure-footed, better than horses for this kind of work. Taki, pasus by it. The next day crawled by. Clara tried to focus on normal tasks, but kept catching herself staring at the clock. Ethan spent the day preparing, checking equipment, mixing powder charges, mapping routes in his head. By dinner, they were both too nervous to eat much. You can still back out, Ethan said as darkness fell. No one would blame you. I'm not backing out. Clara checked the supplies one more time. Are we ready? As we'll ever be. Sam arrived just after full dark, leading a mule loaded with gear. They set out quietly, avoiding the main trails, using starlight to navigate. The ride to Widow's Ridge took 3 hours. They tied the animals a mile from the work site and went the rest of the way on foot. The dam construction was dark, abandoned for the night. But Garrett had posted guards. Clara counted 2, both sitting by a fire at the base of the dam, talking in low voices. Ethan led them upstream, away from the guards, climbing over rocks in darkness so complete Clara couldn't see her own hands. She followed by feel, trusting Ethan's knowledge of the terrain. Finally, he stopped. Here, this is the spot. Clara couldn't see what made this location special, but Ethan seemed certain. He began unpacking equipment, working by touch more than sight. Sam posted himself on a high rock where he could see both the work site and the guard fire below. How long? Clara whispered. 90 minutes. Maybe 2 hours. Ethan was already drilling into rock, the sound muffled by wind and distance. Start ferrying supplies from the cache point. Carefully. Clara made 6 trips back and forth, carrying powder, fuses, equipment. Her muscles screamed. Sweat soaked through her clothes despite the cold. But she didn't stop. Ethan worked with focused precision, drilling holes, setting charges, measuring fuses. Clara watched him transform into someone else. Not the rancher she knew, but the miner he'd been before. Someone who understood explosives and rock and controlled destruction. Almost done, he finally whispered. One more charge and we can... Sam's whistle cut through the darkness. One short blast. Their signal for danger. Ethan froze. Douse the light. Clara killed the small lantern they'd been using. Darkness swallowed them. Voices drifted up from below, not from the guard fire, but closer, moving toward them. Someone's coming, Sam hissed, scrambling down from his perch. 3 men, maybe 4. They've got lanterns. Did they see us? Don't know, but they're heading this way. Ethan swore under his breath. The last charge isn't set. If we light the fuses now. Will it still work? Clara asked. Maybe, but the water won't redirect properly. It'll just blow a hole. Better than getting caught. Clara could see lantern light now, bobbing in the darkness, getting closer. Ethan hesitated for only a second. Then, get Sam back to the animals. Run. I'll light the fuses and follow. We're not leaving you. Clara, light them. We'll all run together. The lanterns were close enough now that Clara could hear individual voices. One was Garrett's. She recognized his Eastern accent. I want this whole area secured. If Hale's going to try something stupid, it'll be up here. Ethan struck flint to steel. The fuses caught, sparking to life with tiny orange flames that ate toward the charges. Run! Now! They ran. Clara had never moved so fast in her life. She crashed through darkness, following the white blur of Sam's shirt ahead of her, her feet finding purchase through pure desperation. Behind them, voices shouted. The lanterns gave chase. There! Someone's up there! Stop them! But they had the advantage of darkness and knowledge of terrain. Clara's lungs burned. Her legs threatened to give out. She could hear Ethan behind her, his breathing harsh. The fuses burned. They reached the animals just as the first explosion lit up the night. The sound was enormous, a crack like the world splitting open. The ground shook. Behind them, Clara heard men screaming, scrambling. The second explosion followed, then the third. Rock groaned and shrieked. Something massive gave way with a sound like thunder. Mount up! Ethan yelled. Go! They rode hard through darkness, the mule protesting but keeping pace. Behind them, more shouting, chaos, the sound of rushing water. They didn't stop until they were miles away, until the ranch buildings came into view and the horizon was starting to gray with dawn. In the growing light, Clara could see Ethan's face, streaked with rock dust, eyes wild, something fierce burning behind them. Did it work? She gasped. I don't know. We'll find out when the sun comes up. He dismounted, steadied himself against his horse. But we're alive. That's something. Sam slid off the mule, wheezing. Never. Doing that. Again. Clara started laughing. She couldn't help it. The adrenaline, the fear, the sheer insanity of what they'd just done. It all bubbled up and came out as laughter that bordered on hysteria. Ethan looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Then he started laughing too. Deep, genuine laughter that Clara hadn't heard from him before. Sam joined in, and they stood there in the pre-dawn light, three people who'd just blown up a mountainside, laughing like lunatics because they were alive and it was over and there was nothing else to do. When the laughter finally died, Ethan looked at Clara. Thank you, he said, for being crazy enough to do this with me. Thank you for letting me. They stood there, and Clara felt something shift between them, something that had been building for months since that first day at the locked gate. Something neither of them quite knew how to name. Sam cleared his throat. I'm going to bed. You two can handle the livestock. He hobbled off, leaving them alone in the quiet morning. We should check the cattle, Claire said. Yeah, we should. Neither of them moved. Clara! Whatever he'd been about to say was interrupted by the sound of hooves. They turned to see riders approaching fast. Clara's heart sank, Garrett's men, come to arrest them for what they'd done. But as the riders got closer, she recognized Mr. Jacobson, and behind him, two other ranchers from their cooperative meetings. Jacobson pulled up, his face split in a grin Clara had never seen before. You did it, he said. We saw the explosions from my place, rode up at first light to check. He laughed. Miller Creek's running east now, cutting right past Garrett's dam like it was never there. He's up there right now, screaming at his workers. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Clara felt relief wash through her so intensely her legs went weak. It worked, she whispered. It worked, Ethan confirmed. Then louder, to Jacobson. The cooperative, are you in? Hell yes, we're in. After seeing what you three pulled off, if you can move a creek, we can sure as hell organize ourselves. Jacobson extended his hand. Count us in, all of us. They shook on it as the sun rose over the Montana landscape, painting everything gold and red and full of impossible promise. News of what they'd done spread through Collier Creek like fire through dry grass. By noon, half the town knew that Ethan Hale and his housekeeper had blown up a mountainside and redirected Miller Creek. By evening, everyone knew. And by the next morning, Garrett was at their door with the sheriff. Clara saw them coming from the kitchen window. Two riders, Garrett on his expensive horse, and Sheriff Morrison, a weathered man in his 60s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Ethan? She called. We've got company. He came from the barn, wiping grease from his hands. His face went tight when he saw who it was, but he didn't run. Just stood there waiting as they rode up. Garrett dismounted first, his expression cold fury barely contained. "You sabotaged my operation." "I redirected water on public land," Ethan said evenly. "Nothing illegal about that. You used explosives, endangered my workers, destroyed property." Garrett turned to the sheriff. "I want him arrested." Morrison sighed. "Mr. Garrett, I understand you're upset." "Upset? He could have killed someone." "But he didn't. And the land where he set those charges, that's not your land. That's territorial property. He had as much right to be there as your crew did." Morrison shifted in his saddle. "As for the creek, water don't belong to anybody until it's on your property. If it decided to flow a different direction, that's nature." "Nature had help." Garrett's voice was ice. "And we both know it. What I know is that you tried to dam up a creek that supplies 4 ranches downstream before you even owned the water rights. That's not exactly legal either." Morrison looked at Ethan. "You two want to lawyer up and fight this out in court. Be my guests, but I'm not arresting anybody today." "This isn't over," Garrett said. "Didn't think it was." Morrison tipped his hat. "But whatever happens next, it happens legal. Clear?" Garrett stared at Ethan for a long moment, then remounted without a word and rode off. Morrison waited until he was out of earshot. "That was a damn fool thing you did," he said quietly. "I know. Could have gotten yourself killed, or worse, gotten someone else killed." "I know that too." Morrison studied him. "But I also know Garrett's type. Come in from back east with money and connections, thinking they can buy up everything and everyone." He paused. "My father homesteaded here 40 years ago, died trying to make a go of it on a quarter section that barely grew grass. Men like Garrett, they don't understand what it costs to build something out here. They just see profit margins." "So you're saying you approve?" "I'm saying I understand. Doesn't make it legal, but I understand." Morrison gathered his reins. "Watch yourself, Hale. Garrett's not the forgiving type, and he's got resources you don't." After he left, Clara came out to stand beside Ethan. "That went better than expected. For now. But Morrison's right. Garrett's not done." Ethan looked toward the northern hills where Garrett's ranch sprawled. "He'll find another way to come at us. Then we'll be ready." "You say that like it's simple." "It's not simple, but it's necessary." Clara touched his arm. "Come on. We've got work to do." The cooperative met 3 days later in the Jacobsons' barn. 8 ranching families crammed into a space meant for livestock, perched on hay bales and fence rails, everyone talking at once until Mr. Jacobson whistled for quiet. "All right, settle down. We're here to figure out how this thing works." He looked at Clara. "You're the one with the plan. Floor's yours." Clara stood, her notes clutched in hands that wanted to shake. Public speaking had never been her strength, but she'd spent 3 days preparing, and these people were here because they wanted to listen. "The cooperative works on a simple principle," she began. "Instead of each ranch operating alone, we pool resources, share equipment, negotiate as a group for supplies, help each other during emergencies." She spread her rough organizational chart on a barrel top. "Each family keeps ownership of their land, but we make major decisions together. What to plant, when to sell cattle, how to handle threats like Garrett." "Who's in charge?" someone called out. "No one. We vote on everything. Majority rules." "What if there's a tie?" "Then we keep talking until there's not." Clara met their eyes. "This only works if everyone has equal say. The minute one person starts dictating, it falls apart." Mrs. Chen raised her hand. "What about finances? If we're pooling money..." "We're not. Not exactly." Clara pulled out another sheet. "Each family contributes based on what they can afford. Those funds go into a shared account for emergencies and collective purchases. But individual earnings stay individual. And if someone wants out, they can leave any time, take their initial contribution with them." Clara paused. "The goal isn't to trap anyone, it's to give us strength in numbers when we need it." The questions continued for an hour. Clara answered what she could, admitted what she didn't know, wrote down concerns to research later. Slowly, The group began to coalesce around the idea. Not everyone was convinced. 2 families left before the meeting ended, but 6 stayed. 6 families willing to try something new. It was enough to start. They formalized the agreement a week later with Chen, the lawyer's help. Signed papers, opened a shared account at the Collier Creek Bank, elected officers. Mr. Jacobson became president, mostly because he was the oldest and least likely to abuse the position. Clara ended up as secretary because she was the only one who could keep legible records. Ethan refused any formal role, but promised to help however he could. The cooperative's first test came faster than anyone expected. Garrett made his countermove in early April. He bought out Thomas Wardell's entire property. Not just the water rights, but all of it. Then he filed papers claiming the redirected creek was causing erosion on his newly acquired land and demanding it be returned to its original course. "Can he do that?" Mrs. Jacobson asked at the emergency meeting Clara called. "Legally. Maybe." Chen frowned at the filing. "The erosion claim is weak, but he's got money for lawyers who can make it stick long enough to hurt us. So what do? We fight it, but more importantly, we make it too expensive for him to keep fighting." Clara had been thinking about this since Morrison's visit. Garrett's building an empire, right? He needs workers, supplies, cooperation from the community. What if we cut him off? A boycott. Mr. Jacobson nodded slowly. No one in Collier Creek does business with him. Exactly. His operation depends on local labor and goods. If everyone refuses to work for him, sell to him, or help him, he'll just bring people in from outside, someone objected. Maybe, but that costs money and time, and it sends a message. Clara looked around the barn. We're not just rolling over for him. Some folks won't join, Mrs. Chen said quietly. The shopkeeper, the hotel owner, they need Garrett's business. Then we support them. Buy from stores that honor the boycott. Stay at the hotel if they refuse Garrett's money. Make it financially viable to stand with us. Clara felt the plan solidifying as she spoke. It won't be easy, but it's leverage. They voted. 7 in favor, 1 abstaining. The boycott started the next day. At first it seemed to work. 3 workers quit Garrett's ranch within a week. The blacksmith refused to shoe his horses. The general store stopped taking his orders. Garrett responded by writing to larger towns for supplies and hiring men from outside the county. But Clara could see it straining his operation. Things slowed down, costs went up. But Garrett was adaptable and mean. 2 weeks into the boycott, the Chen's barn burned down. No explanation, no witnesses. Just fire in the night that destroyed 6 months of stored hay and nearly killed their livestock. Ethan and Clara rode over as soon as they heard. They found the Chen standing in the ashes, faces blackened with soot, staring at nothing. "I'm sorry," Clara said. It felt inadequate. Mr. Chen didn't look at her. "Someone did this. You know that, right? This wasn't an accident. You think it was Garrett?" "I think we joined your cooperative, and now our barn's gone. I think that's a hell of a coincidence." His voice was raw. "Maybe Morrison's right. Maybe we should have just left things alone." "This isn't your fault," Ethan said. "Whose fault is it then?" Mrs. Chen turned on them. "We followed your plan, stood up like you said, and now we've got nothing." "We'll help you rebuild," Clara started. "With what? Good intentions?" Mr. Chen laughed bitterly. "Garrett's got unlimited money. We've got ashes. This fight's over. We lost." They pulled out of the cooperative that afternoon. Clara couldn't blame them. But it stung anyway, the first crack in what they'd built. That night she found Ethan in the barn, staring at nothing. "The Chens are right," he said. "We're bringing trouble to people who can't afford it. That fire wasn't our fault." "Wasn't it? We started this cooperative. We convinced people to join. We put targets on their backs." His shoulders slumped. Maybe Garrett's way is the right way. Maybe small ranches are dying, and we're just too stubborn to accept it. Clara felt anger flash through her. "You don't believe that." "Don't I? Look at what's happened. Sarah died because I dragged her out here. The Chens lost their barn because I wouldn't just sell to Garrett and move on. Everyone I touch ends up worse off." He turned to face her. "Maybe you should leave before I ruin you too." "Stop it. I'm serious, Clara. You've got money saved now, skills, you could go anywhere, start fresh. I don't want anywhere else. I want here. She moved closer. And you don't get to push me away because you're scared we might lose. We might, but we also might win, and either way I'm staying. Why? The question came out raw. Why stay when leaving would be easier? Because easy isn't the same as right. Because these people need someone to believe in them even when they can't believe in themselves. Because… She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Because what? Because I love you, you stubborn fool, and I'm not walking away from that just because the fight got harder. Silence crashed between them. Ethan stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. You don't mean that, he said finally. Yes, I do. Clara, I'm a disaster. I'm broke. I'm probably going to lose this ranch. I can't even protect the people who trust me. I don't love you because you're perfect. I love you because you keep trying even when failing seems certain. Because you took in a stranger with nothing and gave her a chance to become something more. Because you're willing to blow up mountains to protect what matters. She closed the distance between them. I love you because you're real, flawed and struggling and trying anyway. That's more than most people ever manage. Ethan's defenses crumbled. She watched it happen, saw the walls he'd built around himself since Sarah's death finally crack and fall. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know how to do this, how to let someone in again. Neither do I, but we can figure it out together. He reached for her then, pulled her close. When he kissed her, it tasted like relief and fear, and hope, all tangled together. Clara kissed him back and felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of what home meant. They stood there in the barn, holding each other while the world outside remained complicated and dangerous. But for that moment, it didn't matter. They had this, each other. That was enough. The next morning, they found something that changed everything. Sam rode in at dawn, waving a newspaper he'd picked up in town. You need to see this. The headline was small, buried on page 4, but the content made Clara's breath catch. Eastern investor faces fraud charges. The article detailed allegations against Malcolm Garrett, the very same man buying up Montana ranches. Apparently, his Eastern business dealings involved forged documents, misappropriated funds, and investors who'd been systematically cheated. Federal marshals were investigating. Warrants were being issued. Is this the same Garrett? Clara asked. Got to be. How many Malcolm Garretts are buying Montana land? Sam grinned. Man's a fraud, and now everyone's going to know it. Ethan grabbed the paper, read it twice. If he's facing federal charges, his assets might be frozen, including recently purchased property. Like Wardell's ranch, Clara finished, which means his claim to the water rights is questionable at best. Ethan started pacing. We need to get this to Chen. File a challenge before Garrett can move his money around. They rode into town within the hour. Chen read the article with growing excitement. This changes everything. If Garrett's purchases were made with fraudulent funds, they could be invalidated, returned to the original owners, or put up for public sale. He started making notes. I can file a motion to freeze the Wardell sale pending investigation. It might not work, but it'll buy time. How much time? Clara asked. Depends on the federal case. Could be weeks, could be months. Chen looked up. But if Garrett's found guilty, his Montana holdings become uncertain. Most buyers won't touch them until ownership is clear. Which means he can't leverage them for more money, Ethan said slowly. Can't use them to force us out. Exactly. He's effectively frozen. Chen stood. Let me file this. I'll send copies to every newspaper in the territory. Make sure everyone knows who they're dealing with. The story exploded. Within days, every paper in Montana was running versions of it. Garrett, the Eastern investor with unlimited money, was actually a con artist facing serious charges. His workers quit en masse. His suppliers demanded cash up front. The boycott, which had been struggling, suddenly became unnecessary. No one wanted to be associated with him. Garrett himself disappeared, rode out of Collier Creek one morning and didn't come back. Rumors said he'd fled to Canada. Others claimed he was in federal custody. Either way, he was gone. His Montana assets went into receivership. A court-appointed administrator took control, promising to sort out ownership once the fraud case concluded. The Wardell Ranch and water rights were frozen in legal limbo. It wasn't a clean victory. Nothing about it was clean. But it was victory nonetheless. The cooperative held a meeting to assess where things stood. The Chens returned, cautiously optimistic. 2 families who'd been sitting on the fence joined. By May, they had 12 ranches participating, almost a third of the small operations in the county. "We need to plan for the future," Mr. Jacobson said. "Garrett's gone, but others like him will come. We need to be ready." "We need land," someone suggested. "If the Wardell place goes up for auction, maybe the cooperative could buy it, pool our resources." "And do what with it?" Mrs. Chen asked. Clara had been thinking about this. "Make it a community space, shared pasture for anyone who needs it. Maybe a barn big enough to store everyone's equipment, a place for families who are starting out and can't afford their own land yet." "Like a refuge," Mrs. Jacobson said thoughtfully. "Exactly. A place where people can get their footing, learn ranching, figure out if this life is for them." Clara looked around the room. "We all know how hard it is to start with nothing. What if we made it easier for the next generation?" The idea took root. They started planning, calculating costs, figuring out how to make it work. Chen researched the legal requirements. The cooperative's treasury began growing as families contributed what they could. By July, when the Wardell property finally went to auction, they were ready. The bidding was sparse. Garrett's fraud had tainted the property in most people's eyes. The cooperative got it for less than it was worth, and suddenly they owned 600 acres, a decent house, 2 barns, and water rights to Miller Creek's headwaters. They celebrated at the Jacobsons' ranch that night. Food, music, the kind of community gathering Clara had only read about in books. She stood at the edge of it, watching families mingle, children run wild, people who'd been strangers 6 months ago laughing like old friends. Ethan found her there. "Why aren't you celebrating? This was your idea." "I am celebrating, just quietly." She leaned into him. "It's a lot to take in, all of this. We did good work." "We did, but it's not finished." Clara gestured at the crowd. "This is just the beginning. We've got to make the refuge actually work. Figure out how to sustain it. Keep the cooperative functional when disagreements come up, and they will. One crisis at a time." Ethan wrapped an arm around her waist. "Besides, we've got help now. We're not doing this alone." "No, we're not." Clara smiled. "That's the part that still surprises me. How many people showed up when it mattered? People are funny like that. Give them something worth showing up for, they will." He paused. "Speaking of which, I have something to ask you." "What?" Ethan turned her to face him. "Marry me." Clara's heart stuttered. "What?" "I know the timing's terrible. We're broke. We just fought off a land grab. The ranch is barely profitable. Ethan, but I love you, and I'm tired of pretending this is temporary. You're the best thing that's happened to me, and I don't want to waste any more time being too scared to say it." He took her hands. "Marry me. Be my partner in all of this. Not just the work, but the life." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "Yes. Yes? Yes, you idiot. Of course, yes." She laughed through the tears. "Did you think I'd say no?" "I was maybe 60% sure you'd say yes. The other 40% thought you'd tell me I was insane and needed to think about it more. I am telling you you're insane, but I'm also saying yes." Clara kissed him. "We're both insane. That's why this works." They got married in August in the Collier Creek Church, with half the county in attendance. Mrs. Patterson sat in the back looking like she'd swallowed something sour, but even she couldn't completely rain on the day. Clara wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself. Ethan wore his one good suit. Sam stood as best man and cried through the whole ceremony. The reception was at the new cooperative property, the refuge they'd named Hope Ranch, because Clara said every place that gave people second chances needed a name that reflected that. Standing there with Ethan's arm around her, watching families she'd helped organize celebrate together, Clara thought about locked gates and abandoned beginnings. About the woman who'd stood in Montana dust with $4 and no future. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned that home wasn't about where you came from or what you'd lost. It was about what you chose to build when the world gave you nothing but hard ground and long odds. Over the next year, Hope Ranch became exactly what Clara had envisioned. They converted the main house into a learning center. Young families could stay there while they learned ranching from experienced neighbors. The cooperative taught everything: cattle management, bookkeeping, equipment repair, how to survive Montana winters without losing your mind. 3 families came that first year. 1 didn't make it, packed up after 6 months and headed back east. But 2 stayed, eventually buying small parcels nearby and joining the cooperative themselves. It wasn't perfect. The cooperative had fights, loud, messy disagreements about everything from finances to grazing schedules. But they worked through them, voted, compromised, kept moving forward. Clara managed the refuge's books and programs. Ethan handled operations, teaching new ranchers the practical skills they needed. Together, they made it work in a way neither could have alone. Their own ranch improved too. With cooperative support, they finally got ahead of the constant crisis management. Ethan hired 2 full-time hands. They bought better equipment. The cattle herd grew. By their 2nd anniversary, they were actually profitable. "Remember when you said this land takes and takes?" Claire asked one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "I remember." "Were you wrong?" Ethan thought about it. "No, it still takes. But I think I was only seeing half of it. The land takes, yeah, but it also gives back if you work with it instead of against it, and if you're not trying to do it all alone." "So we've learned something." "We've learned a lot of things." He pulled her closer. "Most of them from you." "Not just me, Sam, the Jacobsons, everyone who showed up." Clara rested her head on his shoulder. "That's the real lesson, I think. We're only as strong as we're willing to be together." In the spring of their 3rd year, Clara found out she was pregnant. The news terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She thought about Sarah, about the risk of bringing life into this harsh place. But she also thought about Hope Ranch, about the community they'd built, about having support when things got hard. This wouldn't be Sarah's story. This would be something new. The baby, a girl they named Eleanor after Clara's mother, arrived in January during a snowstorm that trapped the midwife at the ranch for 3 days. She was healthy, loud, and absolutely convinced the world revolved around her needs. Clara and Ethan were exhausted, overwhelmed, and completely in love. "Sarah would have liked her," Ethan said one night, watching Eleanor sleep. "She wanted children. I was always too scared we couldn't afford them." "Do you regret it? Waiting?" "No. Eleanor came when she was meant to, with you, in a life that can actually support her." He touched the baby's tiny hand. "That's the difference. We're not alone in this." And they weren't. The cooperative rallied around them. Meals appeared on their doorstep for weeks. Mrs. Jacobson taught Clara how to manage an infant with ranch work. Sam built a cradle that doubled as a portable workstation so Eleanor could be nearby while they worked. The community they'd built held them up when they needed it most. By the time Eleanor was walking, Hope Ranch had helped a dozen families establish themselves. The cooperative had grown to 18 ranches. They'd negotiated group rates for supplies, established a shared seed bank, created a loan program for emergencies that didn't involve bank interest. It wasn't utopia. People still struggled. Winters were still brutal. Cattle still died. Money was still tight more often than not. But they struggled together, and that made all the difference. Clara was in the Hope Ranch kitchen one afternoon, teaching a new arrival how to bake bread that wouldn't turn to rocks, when Mrs. Patterson came through the door. Clara hadn't spoken to the woman in years beyond bare politeness. "Mrs. Hale," Patterson said stiffly, "I need to speak with you." Clara wiped flour from her hands. "About?" "About the Ladies' Society. We're starting a literacy program, teaching ranch children to read." She paused, clearly uncomfortable. "We need someone who understands the ranching families, someone they trust. I'm told that's you." Clara tried not to show her surprise. "You want me to help?" "I want you to run it, if you're willing." Patterson's expression softened slightly. "I was wrong about you. When you first came here, I made judgments I shouldn't have. And I'm sorry for that." It was the last thing Clara had expected. Thank you. That means a lot. Yes. Well, Patterson cleared her throat. So will you do it? The literacy program? I'll do it, on one condition. What's that? We hold classes here at Hope Ranch, make them accessible to everyone, not just society members. Patterson considered. Agreed. When can you start? They started the next month, 3 afternoons a week. Ranch children from across the county came to learn reading and writing. Clara taught with the same fierce determination she'd brought to everything else, making education accessible to kids who might not otherwise get it. Eleanor grew up surrounded by books and other children and the constant flow of people through Hope Ranch. She learned to ride before she could write her name. Learned ranching and reading and resilience in equal measure. On Eleanor's 5th birthday, Clara and Ethan stood on Hope Ranch's porch watching children play in the yard. The cooperative had thrown a party, typical of how they did everything, turning individual moments into community celebrations. You ever think about that gate? Ethan asked. Where I found you? Sometimes, usually when I need to remind myself how far we've come. Clara watched Eleanor chase another child, shrieking with laughter. That woman at the gate, she was so lost, so scared. I barely recognize her now. She's still you, just the version who hadn't found her strength yet. Maybe, or maybe she had to die so this version could exist. Clara turned to face him. Either way, I'm glad she got left there. Glad you found her. Glad she was desperate enough to take a risk on a strange rancher with a failing operation. Ethan laughed. We were quite a pair, both broken in different ways. Still are, a little, but broken things can be useful. They've got edges that catch, spaces that let light through. She kissed him. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Not even for the life you thought you'd have. Before Montana. Clara thought about it honestly. About Philadelphia, about Thomas Wardell's promises, about all the futures she'd imagined that never materialized. No, not even for that. Because that life would have been small. Safe, maybe, but small. This, she gestured at the ranch, the people, the life they'd built. This is big. Messy and hard and uncertain, but big. Real. Worth fighting for. That's good. Because I'd hate to have to give you back. You couldn't if you tried. I'm permanent now, remember? You said so yourself. Clara smiled. The woman who was left behind at the gate doesn't exist anymore. In her place is someone who builds gates, who opens them for other people who need a way through. Years later, when people asked Clara about her life, about how she'd ended up running Hope Ranch and the cooperative's education programs, she'd tell them the truth. That she'd started with nothing. That she'd been abandoned, desperate, broken. That her beginning was someone else's cruelty and her own rock-bottom moment, but that rock-bottom had been solid enough to push off from, to build on. She'd tell them that home wasn't about where you landed. It was about what you did once you got there. About whether you chose to hide or to build, to close doors or open them. She'd tell them that the frontier wasn't kind to the unprepared, but it was honest. Took your measure quickly and showed you exactly what you were made of. And if you were lucky, if you were brave and stubborn and willing to fail forward, it gave you chances to become something more than you'd been. She'd tell them about Ethan, about the ranchers who'd stood with them, about the community that formed when people stopped fighting alone, about explosions in the night and courtroom battles and small victories that added up to something larger than any individual could achieve. She'd tell them it wasn't a fairy tale, that they still struggled, still faced setbacks, still wondered sometimes if they were going to make it, that ranching was hard and Montana was harder and nothing came easy. But she'd also tell them it was worth it. Every cold morning, every difficult harvest, every meeting where they argued about water rights and cooperative bylaws. Worth it because they were building something that would outlast them. A place where people who'd been counted out could find solid ground. A refuge. A home. A future. And when the story was done, when people asked her if she had any regrets, Claire would think about locked gates and desperate choices, and the man who'd offered work when she'd had nothing left to lose. She'd think about Sarah's photograph watching over the kitchen, about Eleanor learning to bake bread in the same space Clara had learned ranching, about Hope Ranch full of families finding their footing. She'd think about the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become, and the distance between them that felt like lifetimes, and she'd smile and say no. No regrets. Just gratitude for the locked gate that had forced her to find a different way through. Because sometimes the worst moments crack you open just wide enough to let something better grow. Sometimes betrayal is the beginning, not the end. And sometimes the woman left behind at the gate becomes the one who builds doors for others to walk through. That's how Clara Whitmore became Clara Hale. Not through the life she'd planned, but through the one she'd fought for. Not through someone else's promises, but through her own determination and the community that formed when desperate people decided to face the hard land together. The ranch stands today, weathered but solid. Hope Ranch still takes in families who need a second chance. The cooperative still meets monthly in the Jacobson's barn, now run by the third generation of ranchers who learned that isolated struggle kills but connected community endures. And if you visit in the right season, you might see an older woman working in the garden, her hands as capable as the land is hard, teaching the newest arrivals that the frontier gives back if you're willing to work with it instead of against it. That woman knows about locked gates and desperate choices and the long distance between abandonment and belonging. She knows because she walked it. And she'll tell you, if you ask, that the journey was worth every hard-won mile.